Okay, we're live. Hey, good morning, everyone. We got another Cirucci team brief here, June 16th, 2019. We got George and Johnny here with me today, so it's going to be should be a great show. We were just speaking just quickly before we went live. If people aren't aware, this confirmed my longtime suspicion about the police in the United States, just because a lot of the police even wear Roman Catholic symbols on their uniforms. For instance, like when you get promoted, uh, into like the sergeant commander ranks, you start seeing cops wearing Roman laurel wreaths on their hats. Um, but just recently in the state of New York, and this has been ruled through the Jesuit controlled Supreme Court with 6 Catholics on the Supreme Court. But they actually ruled that the police in the United States have absolutely no obligation to help American citizens. Like an individual American citizen has no right to police protection. This has been declared federally, and just recently in New York State there was a case. The New York Post covered this in 2013. This was the headline is, if you can get, I'll link this in the chat. It says, "City says cop had no duty to protect subway hero who subdued killer." I don't know if you guys seen this case, but this was a guy, Joe Lozito, who subdued this serial killer, Maxime Gelman, on a Brooklyn subway. And like this serial killer had a butcher knife in his hand. He ended up stabbing the layman Joe Lozito like 7 times, and the cops just watched. While this was going on in the main subway car, the 2 police were in the conductor room, and they just watched this happen. Did absolutely nothing, and then the civilian was actually managed to disarm the serial killer, Maxime Gelman, and then the police came out and said, "Oh, we got him." And then they gave Joe Lozito absolutely no credit for the story. Like the NYPD came out and ran the story that these 2 like heroic police officers, disarmed this serial killer. So obviously, like the Joe Lozito, like whose like blood was gushing out of his head because he was like stabbed 7 times by this serial killer with a butcher's knife. He sued the city of New York and he got nowhere. And we know like the mayor of New York is the communist Roman Catholic Bill de Blasio, which isn't even his real name. But but this is like the New York is very Jesuit run. Like, well, at the same time that they're ruling that New York cops have no liability to protect citizens, like they're doing like Stalin level gun grabs in the state of New York. Like you can go to jail for having an empty magazine in your car for like over 5 years.
Eric, if administrative note, Hawkeye wanted to join us. If you've got his email, send an
Oh,
invite to him.
oh, great. Yeah, I'll add him in right now.
Yeah, don't get me started on New York. And isn't it weird how people can ascend into public office under an assumed name? Isn't that weird? I mean, good old Bill de Blasio, far left communist Roman Catholic. Yet another. There's only 2 groups. What we call puppet papal court Jews or Roman Catholics, really anywhere, but particularly in running New York City, it just seems to be flip-flopping over and over again. I just happened to be going by while you guys are getting lined up. I just happened to be going through one of your previous chats from June 3rd, and man, I'm still taking notes. You mentioned tell me this shouldn't be in every textbook. Why was Hitler a rabid anti-Semite? Because he learned it from Karl Lueger in Vienna. Now you said, Eric, you said he was a priest.
Yeah, I believe he was like a priest or a Monsignor.
Okay. Because nobody's talking about that. They just barely mentioned his connection to the Catholic Church, but he was absolutely regular. Vatipedia will still admit the Catholic connections, but they're not going so far as to mention he's clergy. But he was a member of the Catholic Student Association, and founded the Christian Social Party, with typical Roman Catholic psyop, is to take this whole Christian socialist, which is, is inversely named as the Patriot Act, and any of these European far left socialists that they slap the term Christian onto in front of it to give you a false sense of security. Oh, it's the Christian Socialist Party.
Well, Johnny, may I interject?
Yeah.
The official name for the Jesuits is the Society of Jesus.
Well done. And you guys also were talking about, I think Eric had mentioned that he is suspicious that the G in Freemasonry stands for Yesu, which relates back to the Society of Jesus and their church of the Yesu, their headquarters there in Rome. And I like that. I like that. Walter V says it stands for generative principles and deviant sexual reference, but I think I like the Yesu better because that's what they do. They psyop their own members into believing that they're standing for something good, whether it's Jesuits or Freemasons. Oh, you guys are standing for Jesus. You're standing up for Jesus. And meanwhile, it's the exact opposite.
Well, absolutely. Freemasonry is extremely compartmentalized. I think it's one of the most compartmentalized organizations on the earth. And I think Masonry. I think most Masons who join in the low ranks have no idea of what they're getting themselves into. But when you get down to the line, like when you go to the top, it's undeniably Jesuitism that's controlling it. What really opened my mind on this was reading a book that was published in the 1888 by Jonathan Blanchard. I'll link this in the chat. I linked this in the Reddit post I made on Masonry, but I found an old book where it's called Scottish Rite Masonry Profusely Illustrated, and it's an actual illustrated breakdown of the entire ritual from like the 1st to the 33rd degree of Scottish Rite Masonry. I'm not sure how this Blanchard guy got this information, but it's good and it's authentic. But like on the 32nd degree, and this is known as the military degree in the Scottish Rite system. Like the Freemason websites have confirmed this. But like the military degree in Scottish Rite Masonry uses the identical motto of the Jesuit order. It's Ad Morgium Al Gloriam, which proves to me that Scottish Rite Masonry seems to be like the most powerful branch, like the most out of all Mason presidents in the United States. The majority of them are Scottish Rite Masons, for instance, that I've noticed. And they undeniably, are working. Like just look at the P2 scandal that blew up in the 1980s. Like that should shatter people's belief that the Masons are working with the Catholic Church. Like there is a Roman Catholic priest, Philip Guarino. I think it's Guarino. Philip Guarino was like a full ordained Roman Catholic priest who is a member of the fascist P2 Masonic Lodge, who served like 4 presidents in the United States on as an advisor role for and then Philip Guarino is also employed by the Republican Party while being a Roman Catholic priest and being an admitted P2 fascist Mason.
Wow.
So there's no if you know the history, the Jesuits, at least with the Scottish Rite, like Manly P. Hall even says this. Like the Masons say this themselves. Like the Jesuits wrote at least the first 25 degrees of the Scottish Rite system, and that's why I think degree number 19 is called the Knight of the Grand Inquisitor, for instance. Right. So you can see the Jesuitism even in the names of the degrees. Like they named a degree after Frederick the Great in Prussia, who let the Jesuits in after they were briefly suppressed in 1773. I think you talked with Johnny about how the Jesuits mastered their own suppression, and the Masons, I think, were key in that plot. For instance, I know the Jesuits in Spain. This is Theodore Geislinger's book. I think this is just good proof that alludes to the Jesuits their suppression being planned. Is that when they got kicked out of Spain, King Charles III had a whole fleet of ships prearranged for the Jesuits to leave for Corsica. I just thought that's odd behavior, to treat these like traitors to your country who are plotting to like destroy it. Like,
You've
why are you
talked
giving
about that
them?
before, Eric. What happened that within like the same year they landed in Corsica? What else? What happened there on that island?
Napoleon Bonaparte was born there, and
That's
he
right.
he seemed to be very useful to them over the course of his career. It was odd that Napoleon was born where the Jesuits were all banished to. And then Napoleon, came back and he had his Jesuit. I don't know. I think he was a Jesuit seminarian, Abbe Joseph Manuel Saez. Right? He was one of Napoleon's military strategists that was leading up to the French Revolution. I don't. Napoleon actually declared war on many of the countries that had just kicked out the Jesuits. And like the creation of the Illuminati, comes into this plot. Like Adam Weishaupt was also a Freemason. I think while
Well,
being
more importantly, he's almost certainly a clandestine ordained Jesuit priest. At the bare minimum, it is admitted by open sources, by historical sources, that he was surrounded by Jesuits his entire life. It's so obvious that they have to cover it up and blow the smoke psyop that he rebelled from the Jesuits. Meanwhile, he started his Jesuit education at 7. What did Francis Xavier say? Give me the child at 7, and I will give you the man. Something like that. Something really perverse.
yeah, that was
And
Xavier. Yeah.
and Weishaupt spent his entire life with the Jesuits, rising to teach canon law, the precepts by which the Catholic Church governs itself in so-called temporal affairs, political affairs, at Jesuit Ingolstadt University in Bavaria. But after all of those many years with the Jesuits, he decided he was going to break, just like Voltaire supposedly broke with the Jesuits. Meanwhile, they were fulfilling Jesuit agendas. So I don't buy that. The Illuminati, anybody that says this is what put me into, this is what gave me the Jesuit red pill. Finding out how intimately controlled the so-called Illuminati, certainly the historical group in 1773, founded by anybody that says Illuminati and doesn't say Jesuit is a fraud.
Well, I
Anybody?
agree.
Okay.
And like there's no excuse for not tying Weishaupt to the Jesuits. Like the Catholic New Advent Encyclopedia literally even says that Weishaupt modeled his organizational structure of the Illuminati off the Society of Jesus. And like you mentioned, he literally taught canon law. Was with the Jesuits his entire life. Like the Illuminati are created just 3 years after the Jesuits are suppressed. Like there's an overwhelming amount of evidence and circumstantial evidence that you're right. If people excuse it, there's something
And
going on
George, it's clear. Eric, but George, just trying to jump in. It's so clear that the so-called Illuminati are just another level of control during the so-called suppression. And I absolutely agree with Saucy that the suppression was engineered. George, you're trying to jump in?
Well, okay, Napoleon Bonaparte lived from 1769 to 1821. So I don't know this for a fact, but they probably raised him as a kid. He was probably an example of that maxim, give me the boy and I'll give you the man. And so I was just thinking, so the Jesuits were officially abolished by papal bull in 1773, 4 years after Napoleon's birth. So they, technically speaking, did not exist. However, this is only applicable to Catholic countries. Therefore, this did not have any effect on England or the then American colonies or Protestant Prussia or Eastern Orthodox Russia. And so those would be big factors. I mean, I don't recall the exact dates of Catherine the Great. I could go look her up, but she was like late 18th century, early 19th century. And she, even though technically speaking, Catherine the Great was Protestant, she was clearly controlled by the Jesuits. Because among other things, She created the Pale of Settlement in Eastern Europe. Basically, what would later be the Pale of Settlement is significant for a number of reasons. One, they basically would comprise the future Warsaw Pact countries in the 20th century, and most of the victims of the Holocaust would be from there.
Yeah, well, she's the one that gave the Jesuits safe haven. They
Yes.
ran to Catherine, and Catherine was not Russian; she was German.
I was saying, like, we know the Jesuits planned centuries in advance, so that's where they probably started thinking about the Bolshevik Revolution. You know, that would
It
happen
was
over 100 years later.
it was thoroughly crafted by Vladimir Ledakowski, the Superior General, and the political butterfly Edmund Walsh. They together they took care of the entire World War II into the Cold War by fabricating both communism and Nazism, which was moved to America.
Okay, John, do you mind if I just throw in an addendum? I wouldn't say they fabricated communism; they repackaged it. They gave it a European flavor.
Good for you. Yeah, that's what they basically they ride any movement. They get in and they take over. So I accept that correction.
Yeah, actually, yeah, could you,
So,
George?
of
Yeah,
course-
communism has a South American origin to
Yes.
the Jesuit system down in Paraguay. The New Advent Encyclopedia even says the reductions were, quote, a sort of type of communism. They even admit that on their encyclopedia.
Oh, okay. So they had it out. They had to say it was a sort of communism. Well, what they meant to say was it was the genesis of modern communism. And something I wanted to say is there is you're talking about psyops, about the suppression of the Jesuits in the late 18th century and things like that. And another one that I think most Catholics don't even know this is that the Church of Rome and the Freemasons are at war. Johnny has talked about this at length. I mentioned this to a Catholic recently, and he said, no, I don't know what you're talking about, because until fairly recently, it was if you're a Freemason, you could be kicked out of the church. Even though that may have been on the books, I don't think that's ever been enforced. And
George, that's probably been as enforced as the Catholic prescriptions against abortion had supposedly the most important agenda to the Vatican is to protect unborn children, and yet every single powerful Roman Catholic politician is far left and vehemently for the slaughter of the unborn, and they don't even keep them from receiving communion.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, John, like, why hasn't Jesuit trained Andrew Cuomo been excommunicated yet? He Catholics are calling for his excommunication. You know, like that would be following Catholic doctrine. Like
Good
back in
luck.
the Ustashi massacres, like Stepniak was bragging that like we've like while he was massacring all these Orthodox and Jews, he was saying to Pope Pius, like, we've prevented abortion here in Croatia. So like abortion, it's a very important Catholic thing, as that last example just shows. So like the fact that like, and Timothy Dolan even went on Fox News and refused to acknowledge Catholics' request for Cuomo to be excommunicated. So it shows the complicity.
For the same reason that Jimmy Savile was still a Catholic knight. To this very day, they refuse to take him from the rolls. They're proud of him. Jimmy Savile is a knight of the Catholic Church.
Although I remember with Savile, I think I heard this on a previous show. I think you mentioned there was like an English paper that commented that, hey guys, like, Savile was a Catholic. Let's not forget that. They've kind of like disowned his Catholic.
Devoutly Roman Catholic. Devout would frequently go to mass during the week. He was so Catholic. Would rape children and pray in Latin. That's from one of his victims. I have that in Eaters of Children.
Fantastic
Roman
information.
Catholic.
Savile, there's a picture of him with John Paul II. If people haven't seen that,
Oh my goodness.
yeah, you can. I don't know if it's at the Vatican or if it's in.
Supposedly during the one raid of Jeffrey Epstein's island there, faux news night of the Catholic Church, Rupert Murdoch's faux news mentions there was a picture of Jeffrey Epstein with an unnamed pope. Not a big deal there.
Nothing to see, folks. Just go along. Just continue.
Nothing to see here. Move along.
Oh, that's what. Jeez. Well, that kind of reminds me like how Pope Francis had his pizza party for his birthday. That was another.
Yeah, his birthday party with pizza and children. Perfect.
Very odd to say the least. Yeah, the Epstein. I don't know. I would assume it's Ratzinger or John Paul II, but yeah, who knows who that Pope would be? If he, and I know you covered it, like I don't Alexander Acosta, the Secretary of Labor. I believe he's a Roman Catholic, but he was prosecuting Epstein and gave him this absolute incredible softball deal that no one else would get in that situation. So yeah, Epstein only had to serve he only had to be at the facility 12 hours of the day or 16 hours.
He was being prosecuted for 5 federal counts and 3 local Florida counts. Epstein got rid of all 5 of the federal counts and basically gave him house arrest for 13 months. And where's Acosta now? He is Donald Trump, MAGA white knight Donald Trump's Secretary of Labor.
And just think about think about the incredible this is Roman trust law at its finest. There's a 2-tiered system. To think about Epstein ended up serving 13 months in a facility where he didn't even have to be there for all the hours of the day. So he gets 13 months, for systematically raping kids. While in the state of New York, if you get caught with an empty, they're throwing veterans in jail in New York State because they had empty magazines in their car. They're going to jail for 10 years. So,
it's outrageous enough, and the number of rounds in a magazine is immaterial. They already at that point had a law limiting magazines to 10 rounds, which was ludicrous. They dropped it with the incredibly illegal, inversely named SAFE Act to 7. So the point is to change things up. They know that good gun owners have magazines. They're guaranteed to have them in larger capacity than the new screw you law. All they got to do is target someone they want to screw over and arrest. Look through their stuff and they will find a quote unquote illegal magazine. This was done overnight in violation of the New York State Constitution, which says there should be a 3-day quote unquote waiting period in order to pass legislation so that the citizens and the legislators don't get bamboozled, which is exactly what happened, which is why Roman Catholic controlled NRA gun groups like Wayne LaPierre, good Catholic that he is, piece of crap traitor, don't even touch it. All it would take is a single lawsuit to show how the so-called SAFE Act is in direct violation because that traitor piece of crap Communist Catholic Cuomo, son of Communist Catholic Governor Cuomo, did it illegally in violation of the New York State Constitution, and no one has even attempted to bring that lawsuit.
Well, he hasn't been challenged at all, which is crazy. And he's built. I know he used millions of taxpayer dollars to build a bridge of Mario Cuomo. So now we're getting New York's getting their Catholic royal family, monuments and bridges named after their Catholic royal family. While this is going on, with the SAFE Act, which no one is talking about, I linked this story in the live chat. It's been declared in New York State that cops have no duty to protect you, and they have no duty to protect you. And the Jesuit puppet Cuomo gave police and retired police officers an exemption from the SAFE Act. So like, what's that doing? Like that's creating a monopoly on force. Like, and that's what every single dictatorship does, communist or fascist. They all.
It's securing the loyalty of the Praetorian class. I'm screwing the people. I'm screwing the citizenry out of their right to defend themselves. And once again, in feudal Japan, a samurai who was the muscle for the effeminate, sexual deviant elite aristocracy. Whatever their whim was, the samurai was their muscle. And a samurai could slaughter a peasant just to check the sharpness of his katana.
That's basically what's happening in America right now, which is crazy. But like, it's basically getting to that level, and it's getting to the level where the police are literally just like a secular extension of the Inquisition. They can do whatever they want. There's absolutely no accountability, just like how like the samurais had no accountability, or like the Inquisitional officers had no accountability in Europe. They can do whatever they want. They can charge you with false evidence and have no accountability. They can literally like even a cop could literally, like, according to the highest court in the land, which is dominated by the Jesuit trained puppet justices. But the highest court in the U.S. has actually ruled that a police officer can be watching, like, let's say it's a Catholic priest, a police officer can be watching a little kid being mangled in front of his eyes by a big, gross Catholic priest and do nothing about it and claim that, it was up to him, it was his discretion not to act. And and the cop, by doing that, actually hasn't broken any laws. So that should tell you how Jesuitical the system is.
In the same way, the Catholic priests are not obligated by law to disclose pedophilia. They're not obligated by law. If they're privy to it, particularly in the so-called sanctity of the confessional, which they violate every hour, they're not legally obligated to disclose that a child is being raped because they have knowledge of it.
Well, it's disgusting. It to tell people though, like, the nature of this like civil system. It's based off like Roman civil law.
Excuse me, fellas.
Just really quick, there's a word out there that people could look up, but like I know there's a term. I think there's a line in Tupper Saucy's book where he actually he quotes a Jesuit saying that the Jesuits wanted America to be a country set up for sinners. But when you get the reason like they're able to do this is just because like it's the registration of the birth certificate, which is actually like a Roman in Roman law, this is referred to caput diminutua. This is like taking you going from one status to a lower status. But when you're registered with the birth certificate, like, you're at the complete mercy of the state. And there's actually a word in the English language called insinuare, INSINUARE, like literally in sin. You are. Actually, I think this is a word which doubtlessly the Jesuits have put into the English language. But this word means to literally mean to be registered into a legal system, to a legal registry, like to be deposited into a legal registry. And this
George,
that's the whole philosophy also of Martin Heidegger. That's a whole other conversation. But he was a German philosopher who taught how like human beings have no like originality, like there's no like creativity at all. Like we're basically just like deposited into the world, which is like the legal fiction system. But I'm going to keep rambling there. Do you want to jump in, George?
Well, okay, not to change the subject. Speaking of Martin Heidegger, I was just looking up something the other day about Kurt Waldheim, who lived from 1918 to 2007. Among other things, he was a Secretary General of the UN from 1972 to 1981, and he was later the president of Austria. And he held other positions. He was the mayor of Vienna. Well, as I said, he was born in 1918, and he served in the Wehrmacht, the German army in World War II. However, his father was a devout Roman Catholic. He was a school teacher and a school inspector. I'm not exactly sure what exactly that was. I mean, maybe he looked at school or something. Anyhow, He was immediately transferred to Waldheim was immediately transferred to German intelligence because I guess he had a gift for language, and his file has been completely sanitized, redacted. That's a popular term these days, and people aren't exactly sure what Waldheim did during World War II. However, there's some strong suggestions he was involved with several massacres. Now, he was at the time, Waldheim was a fairly low-level player. And this, people, okay, Johnny may remember this. This is before Eric's time. But it actually came out in the 1980s when Waldheim was a UN, or just after Waldheim was U.S. Secretary General, that he was involved with the Nazis in World War II, and he was engaged in all sorts of dubious things, and he and there's some strong speculation that he was a war criminal. However, as I said, his file was sealed inexplicably, and so it was as if
it's probably sealed because it's a threat to national security.
Well, yes, even though he's an Austrian citizen. So you have these players now, and you've had these players in the past who literally got away with murder, and not only did they not get punished, but they were rewarded. They become. I mean, becoming UN Secretary General is more prestigious than being President of the United States or Prime Minister of Canada, because there have been relatively few. And how is it that he not only did he got away, but I mean, in reality, I mean, he should have at minimum spent the rest of his life in prison, if not hanged. And if he got out, he should have spent the rest of his life, digging ditches or washing dishes.
Well, absolutely. I mean, like we'll throw a guy, like we'll throw people in jail, like in Western society for, selling. Let's say you're selling, for example, like 2 ounces of pot. That's not like you can say that's not like the right thing to do, but like it's a non-violent crime, and if you're selling a good portion of pot, they'll lock you in jail for like 25 years in some states, and you're seeing little Nazis who are butchering, like hundreds of thousands, millions of innocent people in World War II are getting like slap on the wrists, like getting out after 1 or 2 years, not even serving in lots of cases. And an example of from Austria, it's great information, George. But another one, Kurt Schuschnigg. This is more World War. Schuschnigg was in control of Austria during World War II. He took over right after the Dollfuss fascist regime. There's information, and I'll link this in the you OCR'd this pamphlet, Johnny, but J.J. Murphy's pamphlet, Clerical Fascism in Austria. There's information on how Schuschnigg was a puppet in place by the Vatican to head Austria to lead the transition from Austria being just like a fascist state ruled by clerical parties in Austria to being taken over by the Nazis. But Kurt Schuschnigg, this fascist head of Austria, became a professor of political science at Jesuit St. Louis University for like 25 years. He was a professor for like 25 years at Jesuit St. Louis. Jesuit St. Louis is the same school that it has a reputation of being like a legacy of death. They gave Robert Gallo a sword of Loyola for his quote. And I think AIDS was a biological. I think that was this. I think it's biological warfare. I think it's well established that AIDS was man-made. There's lots of research out there on that. But they gave Robert Gallo a sword of Ignatius Loyola at University of St. Louis, and like this is the same school that literally the dictator of Austria became a professor of political science for 25 years, and like that fact has just been kind of hidden and brushed to the side. I think they just mention it in passing in Schuschnigg's obituary on the New York Times.
Wow,
just with the George, who was the name of it? Was it Kurt? What was the last name of the Austrian? You remember the Nazi Austrian?
Waldheim. And by the way, I was just looking up something. He was a member of the Christian Socialist Democrats, or no, I'm sorry, the Christian Democrats.
And actually, that was Karl Lueger's party. be Hitler's role model in matters of anti-Semitism. Yeah, and actually during Austria, like that party was working hand in hand with Monsignor Ignatius Seipel. Supposedly Ignatius Seipel wasn't a Jesuit, but I think with his name Ignatius, I think there's good evidence he was a late Jesuit. But Seipel was basically like the Charles Coughlin of Austria. That's a good way to describe him. He was very, very powerful in Austria. He was basically, many authors I've seen, like Joseph McCabe has claimed he was controlling Austria. Avram Manhattan claimed Ignatius Seipel was controlling Austria. And J.J. Murphy has also made that claim.
Which brings us back to Karl Lueger in Vienna. Vicious anti-Semite that taught Hitler how to hate the Jews. How is that not in every textbook? The devout Roman Catholic, almost certainly Catholic clergyman, is responsible. You got him, and then that rolls into the Jesuit anti-Semite Bernard Stampfel, who wrote Mein Kampf for Hitler.
Well, actually, Johnny, I was rereading the J.J. Murphy's article. Apparently, Bernard Stampfel bailed Hitler out of like a pedophile scandal in Germany. He claimed it was fascinating for Murphy claimed that Stampfel helped Hitler deal with allegations of like sexual misconduct in the late 1920s and helped brush it under the rug. It seems credible knowing the long Jesuit history of sexual deviance.
Absolutely, that's they point towards, they target sexual deviance for manipulation. They are easy to manipulate sexual deviance, and no better example than J. Edgar Hoover, right, George? Or the Kennedy assassination plot, which was completely run at the tip of the spear by homosexuals and sexual deviants.
Well, it's interesting. Speaking of the JFK plot, I know we've talked about this several times before, and sometimes if they want to get rid of one of the puppets who is out of line, they use different techniques, depending upon what the situation requires. With somebody like John F. Kennedy, they decided to resort to extreme means. However, they need to officially make sure that his assassin or his alleged assassin was a non-Catholic. Oswald grew up Lutheran, and of course, allegedly, Jack Ruby killed John Wilkes Booth. Jack Ruby, nee Jacob Rubenstein.
So Oswald, he was Lutheran, but he had a cousin who was studying to be a Jesuit priest, Eugene Murray, which is probably why they picked this in particular Lutheran.
Well, and of course, even though the majority of the Nazis in Germany and other places were Catholic, you did have a few apostate Lutherans who almost certainly were Freemasons, vis-a-vis Hermann Goering, the head of the Luftwaffe of the German Air Force, Werner von Braun, so forth.
I thought I've seen Bormann cited as a Lutheran and Catholic. Do you know if he was, because he had a son that was a Jesuit, but if he was Lutheran, that would mean he was an apostate Lutheran.
Oswald was invited. Hang on, George. Oswald was invited to give an anti-communist speech at a Jesuit seminary in Mobile, Alabama, during the whole lead up, during this time where he was out there with the propaganda smokescreen actually he was playing on both ends, wasn't he? They had him for and against communism.
Yes.
I've got the story.
Then you had John F. Kennedy's younger brother, Bobby, Robert F. Kennedy, who was allegedly killed by Sirhan Bashar Sirhan. Now, there again, Sirhan was Lebanese. Now, of course, as Johnny was saying, I think his parents should have been slapped for what they did to Sirhan, but that's besides the point. Anyhow, Sirhan was Lebanese Eastern Orthodox. He was baptized as an infant. He was born in the British Mandate in 1944, which would become the nation of Israel in 1948. However, Sirhan had an interesting religious background in addition to being Lebanese Eastern Orthodox. When he moved to America in the 1950s, he tried his hands at several different Protestant churches. He was Southern Baptist, he was Pentecostal, he was Seventh-day Adventist. He was even involved with the Rosicrucians. But despite that
wow,
whole,
great. Wow. Sorry, keep going. There's great information. I didn't know that.
so he was raised in a bit of a religious stew. So by the time Sirhan became an adult, I guess that would have been the 1960s, he became a professed agnostic. Now Oswald also, even though he was of a Lutheran background, by the time he became an adult, he was also a professed agnostic, or well, I've heard different things. I read different things. He was an agnostic or an atheist. So it doesn't really matter what their religious beliefs were, just so long as technically speaking they weren't Catholic, because that for some reason that sells. I don't recall the alleged assassin of the leader of France, Arthur Ferdinand. He was supposed to have been killed by a Serb, an Eastern Orthodox Serb, and of course, who exactly killed Archduke Ferdinand? I'm not exactly sure.
Well,
But
again,
as I said,
the Jesuits would definitely, the Jesuits would definitely want to have a Serb put out in the front because they killed Ferdinand because he refused to punish the Serbs and the Orthodox. He refused to
yes,
take it
of
back
course.
to the 15th century, and like literally in the Jesuits' own book, The Jesuits and Globalization, they literally brag that the Jesuits had they called it a centennial meeting that a bunch of high-level Jesuits had in Europe, like a couple weeks before Ferdinand was killed. They were plotting, his death, no doubt. I have read in even like some more neutral sources that Ferdinand was hesitant to persecute the Orthodox, and this was at the time when I think it was Pope Pius X was in power, and with Benedict XV. Both of those popes openly preached war against the Orthodox. They got that.
Okay, so this is a different presentation altogether, and I haven't thoroughly looked in this. Right around the time, was it 1916, 1917, you allegedly had a Marian apparition in Portugal, Fatima, in which a group of kids were supposed to have seen the Virgin Mary, and she was supposed to have given them a message saying, among other things, Russia will be won for Christ. As I said, I'm not doing a formal presentation on this right now. I'll send something like the next day or two.
George, have you seen the actually, Johnny, you too? This is kind of entertaining, but it's more of a propaganda. But the History Channel did a recent. I think this came out this year or late last year. But the History Channel did a series on the supposed Fatima vision. But they were trying so hard to make it legitimate. It was kind of pathetic the way that they were presenting it. Making it seem like really, do you think if Fatima came, would Fatima be political? If she was coming down to the earth from the divine zones, why would she be thinking about earthly politics? It's
The vision of Fatima. The most important thing about the vision of Fatima is the name, connecting the Catholic Church to the manipulation of Islam. Fatima was Muhammad's.
Muhammad's daughter, isn't it?
Yeah, his favorite daughter. I think it was daughter. Yeah, let me double check.
And this week the Jesuit EU has now passed a law saying that the thought police over there, you cannot criticize Muhammad or you're going to jail.
Yeah, it was his favorite daughter. Yeah, and the reason why in Portugal it was chosen was because to further control and manipulate Islam. And there are some sources that say that Islam was manipulated by the Vatican from the very beginning, not to include, not to include, and perhaps the most important source is ex-Jesuit priest Alberto Rivera said that he had a personal briefing from Cardinal Bay on how the Catholic Church had been manipulating Islam from the very beginning.
I'm saying Cardinal Bay would be in a position to know. I think he was Pius XII confessor.
Yeah, good for you.
Very read in. And you know,
Well,
recently, just I know we've covered this, but this is such an important fact that this is why I repeat it. Like recently, the Saudi king, a Muslim king, King Abdullah, was made into the strictly Catholic order. Like what? How does that work? Like a Muslim king was made a knight of the Order of the Golden Fleece. So that should tell you that should tell you that there's something going on, that they're knighting Muslim kings into Catholic orders. And you know, just very, like, you know, that we can go into this could be like a whole show, but you know, Sharia law and canon law do have their similarities, and that they put a lot of power into like the ecclesiastical bodies that govern those two codes. And you know, it's very rigid. Like the Catholicism and Islam are, you know, two religions that it's a way of life on top of a religion. Like it's a big commitment. It's more than just like a physical. It's a big physical and mental commitment to it, and that's why it's no coincidence to me that they're the two biggest religions on the planet right now. I don't think it's coincidence that like the two biggest religions on the planet are also the two biggest oppressive religions on the planet. Maybe that's the best way better way to word it. But
I prefer to reach out to Muslims and tell them how manipulated they have been. Tell them how used they have been, particularly in regards to jihad and Muslim terrorism, quote unquote, and how that it's a complete fabrication of Roman-controlled Western intelligence agency. I just as soon continue to try and reach out to Muslims to piss them off about how they've been used in an agenda, in a Roman agenda.
oh, I tried to reach out too. Like my girlfriends are actually Muslim, so I've been telling her, you know, some of this research.
Oh, wow.
But I grew up in London, Ontario, very multicultural town. A lot of my buddies in high school were Muslims, and yeah, you know, we had, you know, conversations of U.S. foreign policy. I wasn't privy to this stuff about the Vatican while I was in high school, but I think a lot of Muslims are aware that the United States is controlling ISIS, Al Qaeda, these various terrorist groups. But I don't think a lot of them make the connection to the Vatican, which is very important. That
They should. They absolutely should, especially with Al Qaeda being created by leftist devout Roman Catholic Zbigniew Brzezinski, Polish Jew, who vehemently hated Russia. And you guys have talked about this before. Proof of this connection, this Roman connection between politics and propaganda. How many of these families, these key Roman Catholic families, have feet in both venues, both politics and propaganda, with Zbigniew being such a key player in politics, and his little Mika being such a key player in propaganda? And George mentioned this on one of your previous chats, how she was the one that broke the story of 9/11. Why? Because she's a trusted traitor puppet that was willing to be used in a overt psyop against the American people, and that's how you make a name for yourself.
Oh, great. You know, spot on. Just with Brzezinski, people aren't aware. Just a lot of people know like he was a Jesuit agent, but he was actually educated at like an official Jesuit school in Canada. Actually, interestingly, Brzezinski went to Loyola High School in Montreal, and he also went to McGill, which is very Jesuit. The Jesuits basically control McGill, and that's why while the Jesuit puppet Jean Vanier or George Vanier was Governor General, they were doing the MK Ultra CIA mind control at McGill University, for instance. But just I want to mention like another family just off the top of my head that ties into the Brzezinski's same exact thing as the Kumos, the Cuomos.
Yeah.
There's
little Chrissy Cuomo. You got the Catholic communist governors. How is it that New York's the state of New York couldn't put up anybody else? They had to repeatedly put up a daddy Cuomo and a baby Cuomo in order to govern them in that state and to do so much heinous arm. And then you got Mario Cuomo, you got Andy Cuomo running politics for Rome, and then on CIANN you got little Chrissy Cuomo as one of their as one of their quote unquote journalists.
Yeah, he's one of their biggest anchors too. He's on like the primetime hours.
I mentioned.
Go ahead, George.
Let's give me a follow. Okay, I know you're talking about Mika Brzezinski, how she was Johnny on the spot on 9/11. Well, and I mentioned this to you before, but speaking of Johnny, John Daly, who lived from 1914 to 1991, he was born in South Africa. His dad was a geologist. So he was the Dalys were Americans, but his dad was the geologist who lived in South Africa. John Daly, as I said this before, he went to a Marist High School in Johannesburg, and when he moved back to the States, he got a degree in journalism from Boston College. So he started working for CBS Radio in 1936. And now, forgive me for repeating myself, but this is a very Mika Brzezinski-esque. He was the first radio reporter to announce the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the death of Franklin Roosevelt in 1945, and the slapping incident of General George Patton during the war. After the war, Daly...
George, did I hear you right? He announced the death of Patton?
No, he announced the death of Franklin Roosevelt. He was the first reporter...
Sorry, Mr. Eddie, what was the relation to Patton?
Well, he also did the first radio broadcast about George Patton being slapping a soldier. Actually, there are a couple of different...
George. This is important to know. Why would a Catholic puppet papal agent be leading the charge to tell the world how George Patton had slapped a soldier in a hospital? Why? Because it was part of their agenda to sideline Patton and allow more incompetent morons to screw up the Allied effort in World War II. This was planned from the very beginning. They wanted to sideline Patton because he was taking his job way too seriously and doing all he could to beat the Germans as fast as he could. And we didn't want that. The Roman Catholic...
Patton also wanted to beat the Soviets, which is interesting.
And which is why he was killed.
Yeah, actually, Robert, the Jesuit, just really quick, I'll jump back in, George. I think the lay Jesuit diplomat, Robert D. Murphy, trained at Marquette in the Jesuit Hierarchical School. He admits that he said Patton's ideas were, quote, like crazy about wanting to...
Brilliant connection. Patton was stupid enough to tell Murphy he wanted to drive on through to Moscow. He told a papal agent how he wanted to keep on going, and this is clear and present. The Soviet Union was a clear and present danger to the United States, and he wanted to address it. And who did he talk to? Who did he tell openly like an idiot? A papal agent, Robert Murphy, and that was a great find by UR.
Okay, so I've said this before, but this is how things... we're talking about journalism and politics. Well, this more has to do with journalism and entertainment. Well, as I said, after the war, Daly continued his employment with CBS radio for a while. Then he got hired to be the host of a new TV show called What's My Line. What's My Line ran in its original incarnation from 1950 to 1975, and Daly was a host from 50 to 67. During his day, it was one of the most popular game shows of all time. Later on, it was later replaced by shows like Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune. So, as I said, John Daly was the host of this program for 17 years. And of course, they had all their usual puppets on the show. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's a game show where they have 4 celebrity guests who will talk to somebody who has an unusual job. And they'll have like 2 or 3 people on the show. Then in the end, they'll have all the celebrity guests are blindfolded, and they'll have somebody whom they need to try to identify. One of the regular celebrity guests was Dorothy Kilgallen, devout Irish Roman Catholic. And she was like a newspaper. She worked for Hearst newspapers, and she wrote reviews for movies and plays and things like that. So she had a fairly fluffy career, but she made the mistake of officially questioning the JFK assassination. And she actually said, "You know what? I, you know, I don't. I'm not sure if Lee Harvey Oswald killed John F. Kennedy. I like to go to the jail in Texas and interview Jack Ruby." And she did. And she told a friend, I don't know whom, she said, "You know what? I'm going to break the JFK case wide open." And a few days later, she was found dead in her apartment in New York City.
She became a threat to national security, it seems.
Mhm.
I think you mentioned this lady before. Just so I get the name right, was it Dorothy Kilgallen?
Yes. Killgallen. So, and of course, the regular guests on the show of the original show, Was My Line, were they'd have nuns, priests. Fulton J. Sheen was a regular on the, or he was on the show at least once. So this, so What's My Line shows how Rome has owned the small screen from its very inception.
Great connection, George. They absolutely. I mean, we could spend a whole other show just talking about propaganda and television. That Rome
Oh,
only.
okay. Well, speaking of which, a few weeks ago, Johnny, you sent out an email where I guess you were watching a clip from the old Car 54. Where are you? And I forgot the exact context, but Fred Gwynn, who played the cop, was being
He's
he
an
got in
Irish
trouble.
Roman Catholic. Look, Francis. I'll come up with his character name in a second. Go ahead.
Well, okay. So he was okay. I was only vaguely familiar with the show Car 54. Where you? I only saw it like once or twice in reruns, but I was more familiar with a show that he did
Muldoon.
later
I'm
on.
sorry, Francis Muldoon, George. Francis Muldoon was his Irish Roman Catholic character in Car 54. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. And I'm sure he probably had a Catholic priest for a brother,
Yeah.
Xavier.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyhow, later on in the 1960s, he was in a different show called The Munsters, which aired on CBS from 1964 to 66. It was one of the last black and white shows shown in America, and this is like somewhat nitpicky, but they decided not to extend it for a third season because they didn't want to spend the money on switching it over to color. So, however, there are two producers of the show, Joe Connolly and Robert Moser, Bob Moser. Moser was of a Jewish background, but he converted over to Catholicism after he married his wife, and they're both Bob Moser and Joe Connolly. I'm trying to pull this up. Were buried in a Catholic.
Go ahead. Keep going.
Oh, please go ahead.
I thought you needed a minute. I thought you needed a minute. Keep going.
Okay. Well, actually, I do need a minute.
Yeah. In proof, I'm just archiving this now as you guys talk. In proof of your suspicion and your information, Eric, on Karl Lueger, the mayor of Vienna and the founder of their so-called inversely named Christian Socialist Party, that he was a member of the clergy, is that the Roman Catholic New Advent Encyclopedia admits he was never married, spent his entire life as, what do they say, he never married and was a fearless, outspoken Catholic. The defense of Catholic rights was ever in the forefront of his program.
Jeez. It sounds like to me like he was like a delayed Jesuit, honestly.
At least. Same thing with Copernicus. Copernicus, nobody knows that he was a Roman Catholic priest, yet he too, just like the warrior monk, George, right? Mathis?
Yes.
These guys, these weirdos, they spend their entire lives and never marry a woman, as far as we know. You know,
Yeah,
so
And of course,
that shows you that when I see something like when I see a case like that, I see someone who's like, I don't know, if you're not, I think it's a sign that you're more dedicated for the Jesuits' agenda of world domination.
at least, if not a closet homosexual as well, that has to be raised. That question has to be raised.
No, I
but
agree
people
because like
say
these generals like are like think about like they almost have like no relatability to like the average American. They're thinking literally 24/7 how to gain more power, like how to control more people.
And Kay Griggs, the Kay Griggs interviews, she goes into great detail on the sexual deviancy in the military and how homosexuals and deviants are the ones who are chosen to rise to the top, particularly in the Marine Corps of all services that I served in.
What was the name of that the person who did those interviews?
Kay Griggs, Kaygriggss. Now her interviews are very believable. Unfortunately, she does not have the full Roman picture. She actually mentions um, Opus Dei briefly, but the bad guys in her purview were basically the Jews, which is why why her videos are still out there. But
Oh, I see. But like some for example like Anthony Sutton's and he doesn't blame the Jews, but Anthony Sutton's information I think is valuable if you understand the Roman picture that's going on behind the scenes. And
you
just
have
with
to
the
piece it together.
military, just I know this was you told me that I thought this was crazy, and I'm gonna get a copy of Kathy O'Brien's book at some point. But I found that this was on like an obscure Catholic source too. That General Thomas S. Power, the head of the U.S. Strategic Air Command during the height of the Cold War. This is on none of his info. Like he was knighted as a Knight of Saint Sylvester at I think it was Offutt Air Force Base, and then you mentioned that Kathy O'Brien claimed that there was direct the U.S. Army involvement in child sex trafficking going on at Offutt Air Force Base. So it's interesting that he was knighted, and like he was knighted in '64, which was like right around when the Boys Town scandal like started to.
And that's where Offutt is. Offutt is right in the vicinity of the Boys Town, the location of the Boys Town orphanage for what we need to be calling the Boys Town scandal, not the Boys Town cover up and not the Franklin cover up, renamed the Franklin cover up by Catholic seminarian
Yeah,
almost monk.
I heard the clip on. I heard you play the clip. He literally admits that he went to a Catholic seminary, and he says he's going back there for like a reunion.
Yep, that's the same
So,
interview where he admits that he had a private audience with the leader of the Inquisition at the time, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, and then he had a second audience after Ratzinger became Pope. And both times, or not, one of those audiences that he had, old Cardinal Joe or Pope Joe put his arm around his shoulder and said, "Hey, we need to get a handle on this Boys Town thing. We need to, we need to shut it down and make sure that it doesn't get out of control." And he was damage control. John DeCamp, the reason why, if you say anything about child trafficking and buggering little boys in Nebraska and little boys being flown to Washington, D.C. for politicians to bugger in secret parties, if you look any of that up, particularly during the 80s, the name that comes up is John DeCamp. That's why he also had one or two interviews on the Bill Hicks show, which we all know is the Alex Jones show, because it's the Catholic dominated CIA that was running all that and using him as a screen. You give the partial truth to admit there was something going on, and then you distract and redirect to Lawrence King, the Jeffrey Epstein of that scandal, who was running the little boys from Boys Town through his Franklin Federal Credit Union. And the psyop is that it was King. Why do we call it the Franklin Credit Union? You didn't have any children at a credit union. The boys were coming out of the kids were coming out of Boys Town. Boys Town that had at one point like had a $5 million a year annual. Are you kidding me?
I bet part of it was I wonder if Lawrence King like took some of the Boys Town money for himself, and it was like
Bingo! He was imprisoned. Why was he imprisoned? He wasn't imprisoned for trafficking little boys. He was imprisoned for embezzling. He stole $40,000 of the money that was going through his bank, and that is why they put him in prison. And he got a lighter sentence than Alicia Owen, who was one of the victims who was trying to speak out. And the monsters, the judges and lawyers destroyed that poor girl and sent her away for 25 years because she would dare to try and speak out against the child raping monsters.
Okay, by the way, Johnny,
that shows the Roman nature of our system. And just to verify, like in these cases, like the police in Nebraska at this time, due to the Romanization of our legal system, were under absolutely no obligation to help those kids who are being raped by the Catholic priest.
That's because the police chief was one of them that was doing the raping. I'll come up with his name in a second.
Oh, great information! And just actually, I have something I wanted to mention to you, Johnny. Just this, you'll find this interesting, George. This is because I listened to your show on Marilyn Manson, and I was reading some of this, and I have a copy of Eaters of Children now, and it was incredibly odd to me that they took Marilyn Manson and put him to a boys' home that was run by the Knights of Columbus in Indiana, and they actually sent him to Boys Town. But Peter J. Doiswick, this passage here got me thinking that Charles Manson could have been an illegitimate children of a Catholic monk or a priest. But he says here, Peter Doiswick says, in the Protestant United States, it is a general, and this was written in 1964. It says, in the Protestant United States, it is a general practice of the police not to prosecute priests caught in crime, but to hand them over to their bishop. These priests, therefore, do not have access to our civil courts, nor are they confined to our jails, but are at the mercy of ecclesiastical courts and discipline. And this is the interesting. This is where I think this might be the connection to Manson. This is illegitimate children of monks and priests are placed in Catholic orphanages, and minors sexually involved with priests are often placed in monasteries to suppress scandal, to avoid lawsuits, and to silence them forever. Wayward girls, Catholic and Protestant alike, are often handed over by the courts to Catholic institutions where many are subjugated to exhausting slave labor till they sign a paper saying they voluntarily accepted monastic life. But it just got me thinking with Manson, because I know that I haven't read the book, but it was literally in the review of the book. Like that, what was that book that came out by his prison guard, Charlie Manson, Taming the Beast? The guy literally says that due to my Jesuit training, I did indeed think that Charlie Manson was like the beast or something like that. It was so like outrageous, like.
Yeah, he was personally selected by a Catholic priest chaplain to be moved to Boys Town. The name of the police chief in Omaha at the time was Robert Wadman, Wadman, who was also raping children, courtesy of Boys Town. As the heat started to be turned on, Wadman transferred and became chief of a Chicago suburb police unit. And by coincidence, extreme cynicism, private investigator Gary Caradori, who was looking into the child trafficking, his plane disintegrated in midair over Robert Wadman's jurisdiction. I don't know how they managed that. Robert Wadman moved from Omaha to a Chicago suburb where he was also a police chief, and I'm pretty sure he was the one given control over Gary Caradori's wreckage files. Unfortunately, Caradori's little boy was also murdered.
Oh, fascinating. So like, he went to probably one of the most Catholic counties in America.
I went down. Chicago was absolutely owned by the Catholic Church, one of the most Catholic cities in the world.
Oh, this is incredible. Like, and I know the camp didn't. This is stuff that was omitted from the book, just on the military's involvement with the child practice. But I was just gonna say with Michael Aquino, I know you put on the clip who is it? I think the camp was close with. No, Ted Gunderson was close with Aquino. That's who it was. So there's a clip of Michael Aquino, and Gunderson is part of the camp psyop as well, because he was promoted. Like he was given a position by Jesuit seminarian Jerry Brown in California. Like he was made like some law enforcement position. He was essentially like the justification. You can find this on fiercelysmart.com. He even has a photo of Gunderson with Jerry Brown. But he was promoted by Jesuit seminary and Jerry Brown, which to me is a little suspicious, to say the least. What was I saying here? I'll give me a second.
Well, that's no different than DeCamp's connection to Bill Casey, another Catholic. What do they call him? Warrior priest, or something. He was Casey's attaché. He was Casey's aide to camp when Casey was the Saigon police chief, Saigon station chief, during the Vietnam War, where they were running was it Operation Phoenix, Project Phoenix, right, George? Where they were slaughtering Cambodians.
Yeah, there was like 60. Yeah, there was like 60,000 that died in those attacks, and they even put they put the Roman military reef symbol right on the patch of the.
Perfect.
And I have the guy's name here. And just Charlie Manson went to the Father Pierre Gibault School for Boys.
That was it.
Indiana.
Yeah, that was it.
And it was founded by the Knights of Columbus. And just really quickly with this and like the fact that what was this guy? What was the guy's name? Kelman, who went to Chicago.
Caradori, you're talking about the private investigator? Yeah.
So the fact that he was raping kids and then went to one of those Catholic counties to continue it.
Robert Wadman, the police chief in Omaha, Robert Wadman, and the private investigator was Gary Caradori, who was murdered over Wadman's jurisdiction.
Okay. Absolutely, and that shows the Jesuit coup d'état that has taken place with like law enforcement officials within the United States. Like for instance, like there's no like they're under no obligation to protect, and that's why like they bulldozed, for instance, the house of Jeffrey Dahmer. Like they bulldozed the crime scene.
His apartment, his entire George got this. His entire apartment building. He only had a single apartment, George, and they bulldozed the entire freaking building, didn't they?
Yes, they did. It was like within a year or so of Dahmer's arrest. Now, a couple of things I wanted to mention. I meant to say this a few minutes ago. Okay, you were talking about Pope Benedict XVI, nee Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger. Well, he was born in 1927, and during World War II, he and his brother Georg served in the German army. Now, they were not part of the Wehrmacht. They're part of the Nazi Youth Brigade. Georg was born in 1924. I'm not sure if he's still alive. But so, generally speaking, if you're a German, you got drafted into the Wehrmacht, the German army. But they had different types of units. But as I said, both the Ratzingers were part of the Hitler Youth. And there are several pictures of them online in their full black uniforms giving the Hitler salute. Now, this is interesting because
George, hang on just a second, bro. I'm so sorry. I'm going to let you keep going. I just want to correct you. Is that the Hitler salute or is that the Roman Empire salute?
Oh, I beg your pardon. Yes, the Roman Empire, which has been rebranded as the Hitler salute. So anyhow, but after the war, both the Ratzingers went into seminaries. Now, I'm not sure if they're both involved in any sort of massacres. They could have been. Who knows? And I'm surprised. I remember reading about Ratzinger, Joseph Ratzinger's dubious background when he became Pope back in 2005 after the death of John Paul II. And I'm surprised. I actually remember reading this in mainstream sources. And I'm sure, why didn't they move heaven and earth to try to omit that? But that's besides the point. So he, despite his rather shady background, that had nothing, that obviously did not impede his career to become the pontiff. Now, this is something Johnny has mentioned. In the 1960s, Ratzinger was, I guess, like the bishop or archbishop of Munich or somewhere in Bavaria, and his older brother Georg was involved in basically a Bernard Law type situation. He was accused of molesting at least dozens of boys. He and other Catholic priests, and Joseph Ratzinger was the prelate in charge at the time, and he basically did nothing about it. He basically played musical chairs with them. He just transferred them to different parishes and dioceses, and it basically disappeared. Even though he had this,
keep going. That's how you get ahead in the Catholic Church. That's how you get promoted. If you cover for the little boy rapers, then the Vatican says job well done, and they give you promotions.
It's a sad fact, but it's historically true, verified by undeniable evidence.
That's why Bernie Law, after watching over all of the little boys that were raped in the Boston Archdiocese, Bernie Law got a nice, fat, cushy retirement where he could sip champagne and eat caviar in Rome. Job well done, Bernie Law. He even had the Jesuit Pope Francis speak over his casket when he died in the end of, was it 2018, 2017, December
2017.
That's very military Argentina junta of Pope Francis.
Yes.
So you're talking about Project Phoenix or Operation Phoenix. Now I've looked into that, and this brings up a point. At minimum, 25,000 people died, but 400,000 people could have died. And this is a completely different topic altogether. But when you look at massacres or mass killings, they almost always, there's no agreement on how many people actually died. They can only come up with guesses. And that is so the cover for Phoenix was, well, these people, according to CIA, these people deserve to die because they're communist or they're communist sympathizers. But how many times has Rome played that card before in other situations in the 20th century and even before? Well, these people were heretics, therefore they deserve to die.
Well, so that's the the model of the Inquisition. It's the dehumanizing of the dehumanizing of the opposition to the church. So killing someone, you're basically saying you're not killing like a human being, but you're killing a heretic. So
yeah, or you could use a different label. If they're not communists, they're Muslims, they're terrorists, or whatever. They're insurgents. But
George, this communism, good point. You brought up communism. The communists, that's how they were able to get away with the Rwandan genocide, for instance. Some of that communist it was just disgusting. They were saying that the Tutsis and the Hutus were both predominantly Catholic, but they got the Hutus to believe that the Tutsis, who were Catholic just like them, were communist devils. Literally, they were calling them devils, calling them agents of Satan here to bring in communism. So you shouldn't underestimate how the church could get people into superstition with communism, even as late as 1990.
Or
Eric, I want to thank you, Eric, I want to thank you for adding. I'm going to finish my series on Roman Catholic mass murdering serial killers probably around 2025, especially when you guys keep adding endless amounts of information. Let's do this. I've had to add the African Jonestown Catholic priest, Jesuit trained Catholic priest Joseph Kibwatiri.
For the restoration for the
Ten Commandments of God and the slaughter of almost 1,000 Africans in Uganda, courtesy of the Catholic Church. Nobody's even heard of this guy.
Well, absolutely, they buried that. Yeah, it was, and it's incredible. He got a scholarship to.
New York Times. Guess what? New York Times says that many of them weren't killed by the explosion of the fire. Many of them were poisoned.
Oh wow! I didn't catch that.
Some were strangled. Some were poisoned. I will send you the link. I'll put the link in the chat, but also I'll send you the full article so you don't have to subscribe to the New York Slime.
Oh, so that literally proves it was Jonestown 2.0 then.
Yep.
I think. And just
2000.
Really quick, I wanted to mention this. I lost my train of thought a few minutes ago, but it was Michael Aquino. I was going on how he was close with Ted Gunderson and Gunderson's relationship with the camp. But I don't know if you've seen this clip, Johnny. It's on my YouTube. You too, George. you should watch this if you haven't. But I found a clip of Michael Aquino literally admitting to doing a black magic ritual in Heinrich Himmler's Wadelsburg castle. And Himmler literally, this is not like establishment sources like G. Gordon Liddy even said like Himmler modeled his SS off of the Jesuit order. So Aquino is literally doing black magic rituals in the basement of Himmler's Wadelsburg castle, which was known as like an SS monastery to Walter Schellenberg. There's probably like a library of books on the Jesuit order, for instance, there. Like Suarez. They got like the early Jesuit writings who taught it was like okay to murder heretics, okay to steal, okay to take an oath with no intention of keeping it. I'm sure he had all of that early Jesuit. I'm sure he had a library of Jesuit books there at the castle. But it's crazy that Aquino, he literally admits to doing. And this guy had a position of authority within the U.S. Army.
He made it, as far as I could tell, to friggin' lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. That tells you all you need to know about how thoroughly treasonous and controlled the American government is and the American military. You would never think, the average person would be shocked to know that a clown, a satanic priest, a priest for Satan, who carefully waxed and shaved his freaking eyebrows to look like an idiot, to look like a total moron, and kept that ridiculous look in uniform, how he was totally enabled in the United States military. The average American would be shocked, absolutely shocked. This is the kind of stuff that should be bringing about revolutions.
Oh, absolutely. And
and the police, the control, the corruption of the police, the control, the corruption
with the police guy, a really key point. This is what I think the Jesuits are actually doing, because in the U.S. Constitution, it's now illegal for the U.S. Army to police. So to bypass that, if the Army can't do the policing, let's just turn the police into an army. That's what I think that they're trying to do, and it's undeniable. Like towns the size of like 10,000 have like 2 MRAP vehicles. What's the mine-resistant ambush protective vehicle? These things are like 50,000 pounds. They're designed to withstand like RPG attacks. Like these trucks are so big that they're weapons in and itself. Like you can do serious damage with an MRAP. But like just seeing some of the footage, like even like if you guys seen the photos from Ferguson, like it looked like an occupied war zone. Like there's almost no distinction. Like the cops were even wearing camouflage gear. And actually this came out through the hearings. That I think this was controlled because Claire McCaskill was the one to push on this, and she's trained at Georgetown. But it was actually admitted in like U.S. Senate hearings that 40% of the new gadgets and military equipment the police are getting is new. The military doesn't even use 40% of the equipment the police are getting.
Wow.
So all of it isn't even surplus. So like I think they're bypassing the Constitution by the Army can't enforce law enforcement. So they're basically just turning the police into the U.S. Army. And just the pictures from Ferguson show that like the line, like there's almost no distinction at this point between the police. And it's shameful. Like I've seen footage of a lot of ex-military veterans are speaking out against it. Like there was one hearing from New Hampshire where this one soldier said, like, if you told me when I was fighting the Soviet Union that I came back to America and like there would be MRAPs and tanks driving around occupied New Hampshire, I'd call you crazy. But it's just the truth, and this is the plan. Like the plan after the Soviet experiment happened in the Soviet Union, the Jesuits said we're now going to Sovietize the West. So America is becoming Sovietized. And you're seeing like in Georgia, the People's Republic of California, like Jerry Brown actually like got into agreements with communist China, saying that California was like a sovereign nation. He was getting like California into independent trade agreements with communist China.
George has heard me say this so often that he's started repeating me. Any police officer that puts on olive drab or camouflage is an oath-breaking traitor. He's telling the public that he supposedly serves that he is a standing military in violation of posse comitatus. He is a soldier, not a police officer. And it's so blatant, so obvious because these traders don't even wear camouflage that has any use in their environment. It makes them stick out like a sore thumb. The purpose is to tell the public, I am a soldier. I am not a police officer.
Well, absolutely. It's pure fascism. Like it's just crazy. Like there's a footage. I watched the movie. You can get it off Pirate Bay. But it's called "Do Not Resist." But like, there's a clip like in Ferguson where like these two black kids had their hands up, and like you can see like 20 decked out militarized cops pointing like their red lasers at them. It was at night, but like they have like dots on them. Like it's crazy. Like it's just it's very fascist, to say the least. Like every single and the thing with with the U.S. Supreme Court ruling that the police have no duty to protect you, this becomes absolutely imperative that America does not disarm, because the cops are legally like obligated not to protect you. So by giving all the guns to the state, you're just giving them the monopoly on violence and force. And
they are working it as fast as they can, and the one who is leading the charge on disarming Americans is good old MAGA white knight Donald Trump himself. I did not realize until I found out that he actually pulled off his bump stock ban. Number one, he does not have the authority. He is not in the legislative process. Fat daughter raping piece of crap that he is, who's almost guaranteed repeatedly, probably even to this very day, still having sex with Ivanka. That's how.
I bet, Johnny, but did he sign an executive order to get rid of the bump stocks?
I'm sure he did. He banned bump stocks, and now he's going after suppressors. So as the idiot conservatards who support him keep saying MAGA Trump, build that wall, the wall's never going to get built, and instead their guns are going to get taken from them by the very fat, corrupt turd who they support, like idiots.
Oh, I agree. I think Trump. I think he could definitely, by the time if he gets reelected, I could see him going for full gun confiscation.
They do more damage, far more damage with their pretend reptilicans than they ever do with their full-on, in-your-face communist demon rats. They do far more damage. That's why 9/11 was pulled off during Skull and Bones' little bushy number 43.
Well, absolutely. The Patriot Act is probably the most destructive bill in like American history.
They specifically maneuvered little Skull and Bones bushy 43 into the Father Andrew White House for that purpose, and specifically kept him there, even though the alternative was Roman Catholic Skull and Bones John Forbes Carey during his reelection.
Yeah, they're telling you, hey, do you want to get punched in the face really hard with my right hand, or do you want me to knock you super hard with my left hand? So getting punched square in the face.
Yeah. Or actually, put it this way: you want to get punched square in the face by my left hand, or stabbed in the back by the right hand. You won't even feel it when I do it. Much better to get slowly stabbed in the back. It's like getting a vaccination. You're not even going to feel it.
No, good point. And with Bush, like just like the Patriot Act, it does uncalculable damage. Part of this like cop warrior mindset to being war against the civilian. It goes back to what Bush said. I don't know I think this was 2002, but he said you're with us or you're with the terrorists. So you're telling the police that citizens are basically terrorists. Like if you're not with the criminal Roman federal government, you're
how the government can eavesdrop on the average citizen without a warrant, without the process of a warrant, should have sparked a revolution.
Well, this came out in 1975 at the. I'm sure there's information stuff was coming. Like they've been doing this for centuries, but literally like in 1975, like no one in the media like talked about this report. Like they literally said in the official church committee hearings that like the CIA was opening hundreds of thousands of Americans' private mail. Already in the 70s, the NSA had a contract with 3 different American telegraphic companies to monitor all phone calls of Americans. The FBI had a list of like 200,000 people to be rounded up in case of a quote national emergency. They disclosed that the U.S. military was keeping intelligence files on people as well, and like there was no talk about that. And like since the Patriot Act, it's only gotten like infinitely worse. But it was already kind of at that point in the 60s. And actually, this is what I wanted to mention because our buddy Ronald Reagan with his daddy, Knight of Columbus, as you mentioned, Johnny, Jack Reagan. That was incredible. I couldn't believe that. Ronald Reagan, probably the biggest Jesuit puppet I think in American history. He's up there. He legalized or officialized the diplomatic relations with the Vatican, the gun control bill in the '86. But Reagan signed a key bill with this police militarization. It was in 1981. It was called this, and this was actually the bill that led to the National Defense Authorization Act, led to the Community-Oriented Policing Services Program. And actually, like the Department of Homeland Security, Johnny and George, has given law enforcement agencies $34 billion in grants to get equipment.
This came out during the Iran-Contra hearings with another knight of the Catholic Church, Oliver North. The Rex 84, the plan for the Reagan-Bush administration to enact martial law during a crisis. And there's actually footage of this in the so-called Iran-Contra hearings where mega traitor knight of the Catholic Church, Oliver North, is being questioned by some puppet about this. In fact, if you just type in something like Ollie North, Iran-Contra, Rex 84, it'll come up. And I think it's Daniel in no way, another piece of crap traitor, actually shuts the other puppet down from trying to talk about Rex 84 in the middle of the Iran-Contra hearings because, okay, listen, we're playing a game with this Iran-Contra hearings, but you're getting serious here. We're not going to talk about that here. We'll talk about that away from the cameras.
Well, that's how they do it, Johnny. I've noticed that. That's exactly how they do it in all of their hearings. Like just great information with the Iran. I'm going to check that out later today. But I was watching with these recent police militarization hearings. Claire McCaskill, she made this comment right after doing, I think, somewhat legitimate questioning of these two Homeland Security officials. She then says, "Well, we need to be on guard against lawlessness and disorderly people coming to Ferguson looking for trouble." That's a weird statement. Like most of those protesters were peacefully protesters exercising their First Amendment right, but like it was turning the citizen into the enemy again. But with Reagan, to lead credence to that program you mentioned, Oliver North laid out for martial law. Reagan signed this bill called the Military Cooperation with Civilian Law Enforcement Agencies Act in 1981, and this was done under the war on drugs. They said we need to lend this military equipment to the police to fight the war on drugs. And they even used the word counterterrorism in this bill as early as 1981. But I think this was a key bill here. It's called the Military Cooperation with Civilian Law Enforcement Agencies Act. This was signed by Ronald Reagan. And, Reagan is another guy that just did so much damage. He signed this bill. He signed the gun control bill. Reagan privatized the American prisons. Also, like have you seen there's a graph of literally when Ronald Reagan took office, Bill Clinton's crime bill in 1994 was also a big deterrent in this. But like when Reagan took office, the U.S. prison population, if you look at a graph, it literally turns into like an exponential curve as soon as Reagan takes office. Like the police state, he was like kind of like the messiah of the police state. I mean, that's a bad term, but Reagan did so much for building up this Romanized American police state. We're just like the Inquisition. The officers they're given immunity to the puppet state.
See, Paul, can I make this up? I know I brought this up last year, actually a year ago, when we were talking about D-Day. But on the 6th of this month, mark the 75th anniversary of D-Day, the Allied invasion of Normandy, on the beaches of Omaha, Utah, Sword, Gold, and Juneau. And I bring that up for a number of reasons, because they made a big deal of it in the media about how Donald Trump was over in France and talking to the Queen of England and things like that. And he said he greeted some survivors from the invasion. Well, I mentioned this before. Earlier this year, when Donald Trump gave his State of the Union address in, I believe, February, um, there were actually three survivors of the invasion in the audience. I guess they're probably well into their 90s. And one of the things that Trump mentioned was that the Supreme Allied Commander, Dwight Eisenhower, and future U.S. President, called it the quote, Great Crusade into Europe, end quote. And I mentioned that to Eric, and he said that reminded him of a quote that George W. Bush made right after 9/11. He said, "This crusade, it could take a while, but it won't be over right quick." But anyhow, the I mentioned this before, but one of the
with Robert, with just really quickly on Eisenhower, we found. I think you asked me a question on a previous show if you thought Pacelli was like ever met Eisenhower, but I found out just through this Robert Daniel Murphy, Jesuit trained, powerful State Department official. He was Eisenhower's political advisor, or I think he was just his personal advisor in Germany. Which I think, you know,
okay,
through the intermediary Robert Murphy, that's probably how Pacelli was communicating directly to Eisenhower.
Wow.
Or he could have used Robert Cody, or he could have used Alfred Cody Wedemeyer, who lived from 1897 to 1989. He Wedemeyer is probably, he ranks up there in terms of absolute treason and destruction with Walsh or maybe Murphy, because Wedemeyer graduated from West Point, and in the 1930s, 36 to 38, he was part of an officer exchange program with Germany. I'm not exactly, so I guess the Nazis sent some officers over to Washington D.C. to for some training over here. Now, Wedemeyer was on the planning committee for the Normandy invasion. And he probably said, well, General Eisenhower, I think you should probably put all these Protestant boys on this spot so the maximum number of them would be killed or wounded. But that wasn't the end of Wedemeyer's career. He also served as advisor to George C. Marshall and to Chiang Kai-shek. As a matter of fact, Wedemeyer was the architect of the Berlin airlift after World War II. You're talking like 1948, 1949.
Oh, fascinating. So he was probably there to betray Chiang Kai-shek when the OSS and the Jesuits made the decision to back the communists. And like I have a source for this. This was from a military source. It's on my. I'll link this in the live chat. It's called the OSS Aid to the Chinese Communists, published by like the National Military Magazine. Literally, it was the Knight of Malta, Knight of St. Sylvester, William Donovan, who said we're giving aid to the Chinese communists.
Okay,
and George Marshall was an integral part of it. George C. Marshall, another mega traitor piece of crap general, was part and parcel to the betrayal.
Actually, in Marshall, he's the Marshall Plan Marshall, is he not? Because the American Pope, the biography on Francis Cardinal Spellman, it said that by John Cooney, it said Spellman was actually like giving Marshall like advice and pointers on like the Marshall Plan. So like the Marshall Plan could have come, straight from Spellman, and who's Spellman's superior? It would have been Father Robert Ignatius Gannon, Fordham president. So the Marshall Plan probably came from the Jesuits if Spellman was coaching George Marshall on what the Marshall Plan was going to be.
Yeah, Marshall Plan was a joke.
That's in the American Pope.
Complete waste of time. So in other words, we're going to continue to destroy and punish Protestant Eastern Germany, and we're going to pretend to resist by flying in a plane load of goods every other day, which did absolutely nothing.
And all it did was they were basically like monopoly agreements for like the Rockefeller, JP Morgan, like Carnegie Syndicate. All it really did was give the wealth of Germany to foreign corporations.
And good for you. Cover to divide up Germany's wealth, right, George? Go ahead, George.
Well, also according to our friend Phelps, yes, okay, okay. For what it's worth, another part of the Berlin airlift in the late 1940s was a part of Paperclip. because I'm not sure, was it?
Outstanding.
They-
Yeah, yeah. Even though EJP is a Jesuit priest himself that likes to stir up strife with racial hatred, he's got impeccable information. You can't trust any bit of it. You have to verify it and use it. What a great story, George, that the Marshall Plan was actually cover, not to get important supplies into the poor Germans, but to sweep the Nazis out. Brilliant, George.
Well, okay, that was part of it. There are other components of paperclip, and as a matter of fact, I'm reading a book on it right now, and maybe I'll do a review on it when I get done with it. But anyhow,
Was that
there's some.
the Annie Jacobson book on paperclip?
Well, yes. Now, just having read a few pages of it, it reeks of gatekeeping. But that's besides the point. Yes, of course. I mean, one of the things I do.
Yeah, just really quickly, I had that suspicion, George, just because that book was in the Chapters bookstore here in St. Catharines, and they don't get. You'll never find a book in there that exposes the Vatican. I guess that's the way to put it.
Okay, so what my methodology is when I look at a nonfiction book, which is generally speaking all I ever read, is before I read the introduction, I read the back, I read the reviews, who's endorsing it, I look at the bibliography, I look at the glossary and things like that. And I just maybe so, and of course, yes, they do talk about Jacobson does talk about Reinhard Galen, but she forgot to mention Edmund Walsh, and she also forgot to mention.
That's a pretty big oversight.
She forgot to mention Franz von Papen.
Whoa. Okay. Just. I'm thinking she's a gatekeeper, but sorry, keep going, George. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay. Yes, she does mention the usual suspects, Hitler, Goering, and so forth. But she's not talked anything about the religious background or the Jesuits or the Freemasons or anything along those lines. So she does talk about William Donovan and the OSS, but she doesn't talk about the fact that he was an Order of Sylvester, a knight of the Order of Sylvester.
Did she even hint at him being like a devout Catholic?
Well, I think she'll do that in her sequel. Yes, I probably just didn't have enough time to cover all that information.
I was saying, it looked like when I held it in the bookstore, it looked like a pretty thick book. But, yeah, I'll have to read it for myself. But great information, George. I had a suspicion that she was probably a gatekeeper if her book was getting out into mainstream bookstores like Chapters and Kohl's here in Ontario.
Well, of course, we don't have any. Here in the U.S., we don't have any brick and mortar bookshops anymore. We still have Barnes and Noble for the time being, but most of them have gone the way of video stores. But anyhow, of course, they had. I don't mean to say this, but of course, they needed to use a papal court puppet Jew as a gatekeeper to talk about paperclip. What is it? 70 years after the fact, or was it 65 years?
It gives them great plausible deniability. You see, here's some non-Catholic scholarship that shows that we did nothing wrong in paperclip, like we had no part in it. So they're able to use books like that for that purpose.
Well, speaking of papal court puppet Jews, something I wanted to mention in closing was a few days ago, a fellow by the name of John G. Dean died. Not John Dean of Watergate, but John Dean, who was a Kurd diplomat. And his cause célèbre was he was the last U.S. ambassador to Cambodia before the Khmer Rouge took over. He was the ambassador there from 74 to 75. And you're talking about papal court puppet Jews, and that reminded me of something I heard recently in a May Brussels broadcast from, I guess, the 1970s. And this is a different topic altogether. Apparently, in the 1930s, a number of people who were allegedly Jewish from Germany and Austria came to the West, usually for the most part to America, like Henry Kissinger. And even though they weren't actually Jewish, they were for the most part Catholic. And I have not been able to substantiate this, so I'm not making a formal presentation on this. But as I said, this dean, Ambassador Dean, as I said, was a U.S. Last U.S. representative to Cambodia before the Khmer Rouge took over, and so he made the decision. And this actually on his Wikipedia site was he made the decision for the Cambodian army, resistance army, to surrender. Just to declare Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia, to be an open city. And he made the suggestion, and he made the decision to pull out well, he actually had to get cleared from Jerry Ford, the U.S. president at the time. But he said, you know what, I'm just thinking, we should just turn Phnom Penh over to the Khmer Rouge, and everything should be okay. If you just cooperate, nothing bad will happen. Therefore, and before this happens, we need to pull out all the American diplomatic staff. Now, I looked into Dean. His wife, I don't recall her, was French. I didn't catch her religious affiliation. And I couldn't find any connections between Ambassador Dean and the Catholic Church in terms of education or anything like that.
Was he part of like the Council on Foreign Relations, like the trilateral?
Yes, he was. Yes, he was.
Okay, I would say that connects him to the Jesuit system with those two organizations.
Yes. Now, it goes without saying, in order to be a general, an admiral, a governor, you had to be plugged in somehow. If you're not overtly Roman Catholic, you had to be at least a Freemason or something like that. This is especially true if you're a U.S. senator. And I imagine the same thing would apply, pretty much would apply in Canada or any other Western country.
Well, absolutely. For example, our current Bank of Canada head, Stephen Poloz, from what I found, yes. All like no immediate Jesuit breadcrumbs with his background, but he's a member of the Bilderberg steering committee.
Mm-hmm.
So that shows that he's completely a puppet of the Vatican without being directly, educated by them or brought up Catholic. Actually, George, you mentioned this. You sent me this email. The current head of the North American Trilateral Group, her name is Megan L. O'Sullivan.
Oh, you can't get.
Yeah, she was deputy national security advisor in Iraq, and she was also like a member, another powerful one of these think tanks that a lot of powerful politicians are connected to is the Brookings Institution. But Megan Sullivan went to Jesuit Georgetown, where I believe she's also professing, and she got her bachelor's from Georgetown. But she's currently the chairman of the North American branch of the Rockefeller Trilateral Commission. And one of the co-founders of the Trilateral Commission, I just don't see a lot of people make this connection to the Jesuits. Like you literally had a Jesuit-trained Zbigniew Brzezinski as the official co-founder, with alongside David Rockefeller, for instance. And like people like with the Council on Foreign Relations, like a Catholic priest, Teddy Hesburgh, was a lifetime member of the council, and like he was on the board for like 10 to 15 years.
He also held positions in the United States government, courtesy of several presidents, like 5 different presidents.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, he's crazy. He was like an advisor to like 5 different presidents too. It's madness. And you can see his when Obama was doing his commencement speech, you can see his power by Obama just kissing his ass during the whole speech.
This is why I continue to hammer my Adventist friends, like Walter Veit, who claim that so-called separation of church and state is the answer. We already have so-called separation of church and state, and Rome swims through it happily with Catholic priests in several positions of open authority, open ordained Catholic priests holding positions of authority in the United States government. It's all true what we talked about. There was you have judges turning over orphans to Catholic orphanages. You've got Dahmer was prosecuted by a Jesuit priest prosecutor. Jeffrey Dahmer was prosecuted by a Roman Catholic Jesuit priest. Frederick Tupper Saucy was prosecuted for tax evasion.
I have the Jesuit's name here on my computer. Father Gregory O'Meara was the Jesuit.
Unbelievable. We already have it. It doesn't work. We need separation of Rome and state.
No, I agree. Like, the Soviet Union is another example of that. Like, they even put Roman military symbols on their emblems, for supposedly.
The hyper atheism of the Soviet Union, who stepped up into the vacuum? The Roman Catholic Church. She knows when you pretend that you're not allowed to give preference or deference to any other religion, she, as the bully on the block, can step up and do whatever she wants. And that is exactly what she has
Well,
done.
and you can't do anything about it because she's going to cry that, oh, this is undemocratic. You can't persecute me as a religion. So it's a trap that.
Either way, if you step up as a member of religion, you can't step up. It's separation of church and state. If you step up as an atheist to complain, you can't do that. I have protection as religion. She wins either way.
It's honestly brilliant how they infiltrated the United States, and they go through the United States. Like they built communist Russia, which is turning into a Jesuit utopia with American technology and computing, just like how they built the Soviet Union.
Fed them, Eric, fed them, kept them going. When you have the total dysfunction that is communism, that destroys the nations that it ruins, you continue to feed them like devout Roman Catholic member of the secret hyper devout Opus Dei, Robert Philip Hansen, FBI agent, who fed information to the Soviet Union to help keep the Soviet Union alive for 20 years, Eric and George. 20 years this bastard was a traitor, was giving the Soviet Union intelligence to keep the Soviet Union swimming and not sinking. And one of the reasons he was allowed to do that is because fellow Opus Dei member Louis J. Free was director of the FBI at the time.
I was say that was his boss, yeah.
Yeah, and then after 20 years, they finally allowed little Jesuit-trained Eric O'Neill to come in and put an end to it. And right after that, little Jesuit-trained Eric O'Neill left the FBI. He was a hero. Why would you do that? Why would you bust one of the worst traitors? How it was the FBI could not know anything about this guy giving information, giving technology and information for 20 years. There should have been a mass fight. There should have been agents being thrown in prison.
Yeah, think about Eric, the Jesuit trained FBI agent O'Neill, and I think Hansen's Jesuit trained lawyer Plato Chastris played a role in this. But they actually ruled that the American public will not get to see anything of what was disclosed to the Soviets. They only disclosed this to an internal military review. But just imagine all of the patents that were sent over, like all of the manufacturing processes, weapon manufacturer models. Like it's probably endless. The treason.
Absolutely. No different than the supercomputers Jesuit trained Bill Clinton sent over to China to keep China going.
Oh, it's incredible, and that's why it's that's why we're seeing the United States is funding both sides in all these conflicts, is because it was taken over. I think it was officially taken over in 1871 with after the Lincoln assassination and then with the passing of the Organic Act. But the U.S. is like the government is almost like a proxy at this point. And the more behavior that proves this was, I think it's 1944. The U.S. sent an American, I think he was an American Polish man, but Stanislav Orlemansky, a Catholic priest, went over to Soviet Russia and actually signed an agreement with Stalin, where Stalin said that he was going to stop persecuting the Roman Catholic Church. And Orlemansky actually made the statement saying that, I had a long talk with Stalin. You can see the video. It's been video archived on the internet. His name's Stanislav Orlemansky. But he literally says, Stalin, that's how he calls him. He says, Stalin has told me that the Roman Catholic Church is being treated great here in Russia.
Wow. Hey,
so that's an example. And after he said this, Cardinal Spellman was furious because I think he knew this was a PR slip. And with the public relations slip, Orlemansky was sent to a monastery in Illinois to live out the rest of his days. But if you understand that, also American through Anthony Sutton's book, Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, I found J. Peter Grace, the future president of the Knights of Malta, was on the board of National City Bank, which one of the biggest banks giving aids to the Bolsheviks. So like there is active, Roman Catholic interest, and that goes into their interest to, remove the Tsar, remove Orthodoxy. Their plan at the time was to remove Orthodoxy. I think now with Putin, they've decided it would be easier to put essentially they co-opt it rather than just destroy it altogether. Because Putin, I don't know if he's made it. I don't think there's any mandatory laws or anything, but it's just the Orthodox Church. I know is very close with Putin's government, and Putin is maintaining this close relationship with the Vatican at the same time, which I think is odd considering that the Catholic Church has literally butchered like millions of Orthodox, since like the 1900s.
And there's the proof. I love these connections to Russia because you would not normally say the Catholic Church owns Russia. All you got to do is look at the flag of the FSB, an inverted Maltese cross with the red field on the corners and the blue is the cross. It tells you everything you need to know about how owned Russia is by the Catholic Church. They resorted back to the double eagle as the symbol.
That's the symbol of the Habsburg. I know that's a distinct Habsburg symbol.
It's also a Templar. It's also a Templar.
Both of those organizations were, Catholic.
Habsburgs, devout Roman Catholic Hungarians, devout Roman Catholic. We just talked about it earlier. Where did the Jesuits run when they were so-called suppressed? They ran to Catherine in Russia. The German bitch who gave them safe haven in Russia. Catherine the Great. Yeah.
Yeah, the Jesuits definitely added the Great to her after.
Right? Part of the psyop.
100%. And actually, just really quickly on the Jesuits, I'm going to go back to Russia here, but I think that Noam Chomsky's linguistics work was written by Jesuits. Because I'm confident saying that. He was only in his 20s when he was supposed to be doing all this groundbreaking linguistic stuff. And I don't buy it. I don't buy it for 1 second that Chomsky has admitted in an interview with Commonwealth that he admires the Jesuits. I have to find more evidence on that, but I think they wrote Chomsky's linguistic stuff. But with Russia, a key fact that I think a lot of people don't know is the current CEO of Ernst & Young, one of the biggest accounting firms in the world. It's an American company. His name's what was his name here? Mark Weinberger, trained at Georgetown, Jesuit Georgetown. Weinberger was in Clinton's and Bush's administration. But Weinberger actually chairs, it's called like the St. Petersburg Economic Conference in St. Petersburg, Russia. Every year, he chairs this conference with the Prime Minister of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, who was actually president of Russia when Vatican official Russian diplomatic relations were created in 2008. But that should tell people something that Dmitry Medvedev is leading this Russian St. Petersburg Economics Conference with a Jesuit-trained, powerful American businessman, Mark Weinberger of Ernst & Young, who has served in 2 puppet Roman U.S. government administrations.
Eric, do you know where Chomsky was educated? I just found this just now. At the University
I'm unaware where he was educated.
The University of Pennsylvania.
Actually, it's owned by the Annenberg family. I know
that our buddy Veritas Aquitas says is secretly controlled by the Jesuits. That is the place where the fat WWE pedophile president ran after years at Fordham to get his so-called secular degree. Noam Chomsky is also educated at the Jesuit secretly run university. I had no idea that University.
Great information. And what got me thinking that Chomsky, like the Jesuit, he could just be like a Jesuit agent that's sent out as like a pseudo intellectual. Was he denied the Cambodian massacres, which were led by Roman Catholic trained communist Pol Pot?
Lightning bolt. When was Pat Tillman murdered? He was murdered after it was leaked that he had contacted Noam Chomsky in his disgust with the war on terror. And that's
bingo. Yeah, wow, yeah. Well, gee, I remember that. And actually, now that you bring that up, yeah, holy cow, yeah.
Noam Chomsky, mega cockroach for Rome.
And actually, I know Chomsky. He was recently on Iranian TV calling like the United States. I think part of his propaganda is to put out anti-American hatred to the rest of the world. Like he went on Iranian TV and called the United States government terrorists, for instance, but without the distinction, like no discussion of Rome whatsoever.
Perfect. No different than Abu Ghraib. Was Abu Ghraib that's just a perfect example of the Inquisition, or was it just America, bad America in general? Perfect.
Johnny.
No, that's
Eric.
the point. That's the key, Johnny, is because people don't realize that like America is acting. It's an Inquisition that has taken over the American military. It's not the American act. It's not the United States government just acting as the United States. There's
It's being ridden, George. It's the sword arm of the Catholic Church. What Rome lost at the death of the empire was a standing military, George. She gained it back when she created My America. Go ahead, George.
Okay, a couple things about that. I know I've covered this before. Donald Trump Sr., Donald J. Trump, as you said, he did 2 years at Fordham. He got his sheepskin from University of Pennsylvania. Donald Trump Jr. went exclusively to the University of Pennsylvania. Ivanka, his daughter and alleged mistress, she did 2 years at Georgetown, got her degree at University of Pennsylvania. Both Eric and Tiffany got their undergrad degrees from Georgetown. Now, speaking of Don Jr., his ex-wife Vanessa, she went to Manhattan Marymount.
Wow.
Is that in New York or Los Angeles with the Marymount?
New York.
Oh, it's in New York still?
So basically,
George, you're saying, George, basically, the chumps have two sources of education, either Catholic or the so-called public University of Pennsylvania. That tells you everything you need to know about the accusation that the University of Pennsylvania is secretly run by the Jesuits, don't you think?
Well, yes, and Donald Trump is supposed to be a Protestant. He attends a Presbyterian church in New York City, although this is something secular sources have pointed out. He always is flashing Freemasonic hand signs. He likes having inverted triangles when he's talking to people or he's giving a press conference. And anyhow, it's about, I guess, about 12:20 Eastern. And I just wanted to throw out a couple of things. You're talking earlier about Ferguson, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis. I was just reading something about
St. Louis is literally a Jesuit controlled like beacon. If people aren't aware, sorry, keep going, George.
Okay, well, I was just reading about Michael F. Stelter, who is on the 22nd Circuit Court of Missouri, which is, I guess, how they divide their courts in Missouri. Well, he got his law degree from University of St. Louis. But however, something that's even more interesting about Stelter is he is from 2002 to 2004, he was on the St. Louis Board of Police Commissioners. And from 1993 to 2004, he was assistant and associate city councilor for the city of St. Louis. So I had to look back on all the sort of shenanigans that took place in St. Louis back then. But I'm sure in terms of, say, riots, murders, whatever, I'm sure he probably had his hand in that. And speaking of people committing treason locally, I just talked about Mike Stelter. Well, somebody who was committed a great deal of treason on the international stage is Barbara Bodine. Now, most people have probably never heard of her. She was born in 1948, also in St. Louis, Missouri. Among other things, she was the U.S. ambassador from Yemen from 1997 to 2001. And she serves on the board she's actually currently the coordinator for the Board of Counterterrorism in the State Department. Now, on her watch, on October the 12th, 2000, you had the attack on the USS Cole, which was credited as being an Al Qaeda episode. So And she got her undergrad. Oh, I forgot to mention, she actually not only got her undergrad degree at Georgetown, but she's a lecturer there, not a professor. So the cold took place almost a year before 9/11, and that was getting people conditioned. And there were several other attacks in the Middle East and North Africa on U.S. ships. And I had to go.
They probably knew about the plans to attack the ship 2 years before that happened. I bet. Like they probably had intelligence reports, just like how there were reports that Bin Laden was attempting to strike the U.S. Well, they had too much stuff to do, I guess. Couldn't act on it. But that could be also part of a setup in itself, because that could be just masking the fact that Bin Laden was a full-blown CIA agent. And George, just what was the name of the connection to St. Louis University you just mentioned?
Michael Stelzer.
Stelzer. Okay, just I mentioned with this. I guess this guy. I found a connection with the police. This guy, the Ferguson was 2014, right? Not 2013.
Something like that. I mean, they have their.
Because the police chief Daniel Isom, ISOM, he was the chief of police from St. Louis from 2008 to 2013. Well, he was St. Louis Police Commissioner. I guess that's the title. But he went to Jesuit St. Louis University and went to the FBI National Academy and the FBI National Executives Institute. And he was succeeded in 2013 by Sam Dotson, who went to Roman Catholic Fontbonne University. So like I just want to mention that because the St. Louis Police Department would have been the overarching organization, I think, controlling the Ferguson PD, and both of their chiefs at this time were Catholic puppets. In the case of Daniel Isom, a Jesuit-trained Catholic puppet.
Hey guys, I know we got to go. I'm going to throw this out real quick. I just found, and this is why it sometimes will pay to pay these bastards. Unfortunately, I am subscribed to the New York Slimes. I found an article on the African Jim Jones, Joseph Kimbutiri, Roman Catholic priest. He was hyper devout Roman Catholic. And I just found how the spin, and I sent you the article. I sent you the article so that you wouldn't have to be bothered with any of the subscription foolishness. The spin is that he fell out with the Catholic Church. He slaughtered, I don't know, 700-800 human beings. It might not even have been him. 700 or 800 human beings were slaughtered under his guidance or with his name to it. And the psyop is that he fell out with the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church denied him. And I have an article here. This happened on March 17th of 2000. On March 21st, his bishop claimed he was excommunicated because he was talking to God. 3 days after the slaughter, then it was announced he had already been excommunicated because he was talking to God. Now, does that sound like something the Catholic Church would do? There are monsters who have spent their entire career raping children who have never been excommunicated. But 3 days after the slaughter, his bishop comes out and says, oh, yeah, that guy, that mass murdering monster, I already excommunicated him, trust me. He told me he was talking to God, so I excommunicated him. What? Really? So we got the goods.
It shows like they'll excommunicate you for like just like questioning like the church. Like there's thousands of examples of that in the past. Like they'll unhesitatingly excommunicate you. So the fact that they didn't, shows.
Absolutely. I don't buy it for a minute. Don't buy it for a minute.
I got to look more into the Kimbutiri story too, because that's a crazy story. Literally, it's the Ugandan Jonestown incident. He's playing the role of Jim Jones. Jim Jones, like Kimbutiri, was very connected to the Jesuits in the Vatican and the CIA.
And the only reason why Jim Jones is a household name and Joseph Kimbutiri, well, there's two reasons. One reason is that Joseph Kimbutiri was an overt Roman Catholic, hyper devout Roman Catholic, and Jim Jones was a closet Jesuit. And the
Oh,
other
no,
reason
that was
is,
bingo. You're spot on right there, Johnny. Sorry, keep going.
yeah, the other reason is that it says 7,000, 8,000 Ugandans. That's no big deal. We don't mind that. We'll just sweep that under the rug. Easy to sweep that under the rug.
And of course, with Jones, he was feigning to be a Protestant minister.
Perfect. Yeah, as he wore his Roman Catholic collar. And as he was
Yes.
intimately involved, and guess what, Eric, as you go in, look this up, Eric. Kimball Wittieri was also intimately involved in government the way Jim Jones was with his Catholic Jesuit buddies, former Jesuit seminarian Jerry over there, Moonbeam Jerry, and the mayor of San Francisco, George, what was the Jesuit?
Oh, Muscombe. So
Who was
Kip was there. He was in like California, like state government at some level. That's fascinating.
Well, not in California, but in Africa.
Okay. So when he moved over to Uganda, he was like, wow, that's crazy.
It comes full circle. It comes full circle in the same way that Luger founded the Christian Socialists in Austria. Joseph Kimball Wittieri founded the Democrat Party in, I guess it was Uganda.
You
How
founded?
about that?
Wow.
He founded the Democrat Party. I guess it's in Uganda. He founded the Democrat Party.
The Jesuits have deep control over Uganda. I'll pull this up. I did an article on Wells for Life, like this charity in Uganda, which is like super connected to the Vatican, like with all these appointments, like intelligence officials are connected to this. The president of Buganda is connected to Wells for Life. But I found like there's currently on the Ugandan Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the land over there. Her name is Esther Mayambala Kisaki, if I'm pronouncing that right. She's a Ugandan judge. She is the justice of the Supreme Court of Uganda, and she has her Master's of Laws from Jesuit Georgetown, and she was selected by Jesuit Georgetown University to do a leadership and advocacy group for women in Africa. That's
that's no different from the Jesuits, Eric. That's no different from the Jesuits involved in journalism and revolution in Guyana, from Andrew Morrison to Bernard Drake, the Jesuits involved in Guyana.
Well, absolutely, yeah. And Drake, he was supposedly killed by Forbes Burnham's forces, which I have to look into that more because Forbes Burnham was like a documented CIA puppet in Guyana. So I don't necessarily buy that. I don't necessarily buy that whole story. Yeah, and the Jesuit Morrison was also an MI6 agent, which is incredible.
Yes, I heard that about. Yeah, exactly, because he was from Britain. You don't have someone from Guyana. You don't have a Jesuit from Guyana, minister in Guyana. You have him relocate. I've seen that too. That the claim that Morrison was connected to MI6, and it makes perfect sense.
And Morrison, he did the same thing they did with Kipateri. He's like, oh, I don't know Jim Jones. Like, I didn't know anything about him. He was just this, like, guy who wanted to come. Because the first place Jim Jones went to preach was the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
The very first spot. And not a coincidence. But Morrison's like, oh, I didn't know anything about Jim Jones. This guy was crazy. Oh, it was so obvious how he was gaslighting it in his.
No different from Karen Lorraine Jackie Spear, the good little Catholic girl who was what was that congressman's? Who's the congressman?
Leo Ryan.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I make a clarification on Jackie Spear? Technically speaking, she was not Catholic. She went to a Catholic school, Mercy High in San Mateo, California. However, her mom was Armenian Eastern Orthodox and her dad was German Lutheran. But just like so, it's interesting. Two of the major people who got elevated out of this were of an Eastern Orthodox background. Dianne Feinstein. Everybody says, "Oh, of course, she's a papal court puppet Jew. She went to a Catholic school." Her dad was
a Catholic convent.
Yes, her dad. Well, yes, Feinstein's dad was German Jewish. However, her mom was Russian Orthodox. So technically speaking, Dianne Feinstein is not Jewish. I know I'm quibbling here because Judaism is matrilineal. However, she has enough Jewish blood in her for their purpose to serve their purposes. So she has as much Jewish blood as, say, Joseph Stalin, the use of Yugoslavia. But anyhow, you only need to be partially Jewish to qualify as a papal court puppet Jew.
For members of the audience, for members of the audience, Karen Lorraine, aka Jackie Spear, was one of the supposed survivors of Jonestown, who supposedly was shot 5 times. And after she was shot 5 times, she went and went through, I don't know, 50 surgeries in the hospital and stayed in the hospital for a whole, was it 2 months? And during that time, she had a full United States Marshals bodyguard security around her. Why? Huh?
Yeah, she said the CIA had nothing to do with Jonestown, Johnny. Like, why?
No,
cut it out looking into that. That's crazy.
She heard that, but she knows nothing about it.
Mm-hmm. And then her case, that actually leads me to, I had the suspicion that the Leo Ryan shooting could have been part of the Jesuit psyop. Because Leo Ryan, whenever I see a shooting caught on NBC cameras, automatically a red flag.
Absolutely.
But Leo Ryan went to Jesuit Creighton, and his daughter actually joined a cult afterwards. And Leo Ryan's daughter, I'm pretty sure, even went to Jesuit Georgetown, and she joined another weird kind of cult like the People's Temples. It just very weird to say the least. And I didn't cover this in the video. I think more proof that leads to Jones being a covert Jesuit is how he got his meeting with Fidel Castro. The New York Times even did an article on it. I think you went to see Castro and
triple Jesuit dipped Fidel Castro and his
literally Castro is literally, you could say he's like he was a Jesuit, like
absolutely.
So Jim Jones, how is Jones able to get this meeting with Castro? That was like crazy red flag to me. But I think a key incident that proves the Jesuit nature of Jonestown was the John Moscatelli, the Air Force official that went down to Guyana to give that press conference with Jesuit train, and he had that famous talk where he's like, "Oh, we found bodies buried under other bodies
on top of bodies."
Which makes no sense. Like the medical team down there said they checked all the bodies, like none were missed. But like this John Moscatelli went to Jesuit St. Joseph's. He was literally a PR executive he was a professional public relations official at a law firm. But like, after this incident, the Jesuit trained Moscatelli was promoted.
That's how
he was made a major after that.
The same way that Karen Lorraine Jackie Spear, who for a good little Orthodox girl, she sure does love the Roman Catholic Church. She changed her name after the widow of Kennedy, Jackie Kennedy Onassis. She now sits in Leo Ryan's congressional seat. She got promoted too for being a good little gatekeeper. In the same way that Joseph Kimball Wattieri disappeared, quote unquote, after the slaughter.
Yeah, he's still alive. Yeah, I think the Zaire police issued a warrant. Like they know he's alive.
Oh, they're on it. They're on the job, boy.
But apparently the Zaire police. I bet it's the same in Africa. But I think the Jesuits have achieved this coup everywhere. But at least in America and Canada, the police are not obligated to protect you. So I'm sure the police are not going to be looking for Wattieri.
In the same way that there are stories of soldiers running through the jungles of Guyana, slaughtering escapees, slaughtering victims. I wouldn't doubt that soldiers were involved. There's no way that 7,000 to 8,000 Ugandans were murdered by a single explosion or a single fire. That's like execution. You've got to have a concentrated effort. And the New York Times article I sent says that originally says some were executed by strangling. Are you fucking kidding me? They said they found banana fibers around the necks of some of the victims, while others were poisoned. To me, that's just practice. You send your monsters in there to get practice. And the article also says that this area was mostly Christian. So it's basically the Inquisition. It's the Inquisition. You go in and you.
Well, I bet it was a very isolated area where they're very, just like Guyana, like Jones. It was a CIA landing strip he went to, but Jonestown, like this place in Uganda, I bet was completely isolated from the outside world. where they're able to cut off all communication to the outside world. So it becomes literally like you said, an experiment. And maybe they're using these guys to test out all their all the bullshit that they do, but they they do test runs on it in literally experimental situations, and then they're able to do it back out with the general population.
Just like Jones's good friend from the FBI, Dan Mitrione, who is also a police chief, who has been reported to have grabbed bums off the street in Central America to practice torturing to death. Monster Roman Catholic that pig was.
Well, absolutely. In his New York Times obituary, there is a Catholic priest calling him like a man of God.
He's an absolute hero. Absolutely.
They're calling him a hero and stuff like that. But yeah, it shows like that's key though. Because Jim Jones is like childhood best friend, about Roman Catholic chief of police, Dan Mitrione. He was literally professional.
Yes.
Well, he was FBI. Yeah, he was also he was connected to the CIA too, I believe.
He had to be working out of to be working in South America.
Yeah, actually, I'm pretty sure Jones went with Mitrione. I think Mitrione was with him on his Brazil trip.
Oh my god!
Like and he stopped in Cuba as well. And actually, Jones was in Brazil, right when there was a coup d'état taking place. There's a military coup in Brazil in 1965 of President Goulart was his last name. I forget his first name, but there was a lot of vested interests in that coup. So it's interesting that Jones happened to be there right when this coup d'état was taking place. Thanks for bringing up that Kipwateri stuff, Johnny. I'm going to look into
it. It was you, man. All I did was follow your lead. I listened to your previous chat and dug a little deeper.
Yeah, I didn't know that the story went that deep. Well, again, I figured with him being connected to Loyola, I guess you can expect anything. But yeah, I didn't think he would be connected to the Ugandan government.
Don't worry, he was excommunicated 3 days after. 3 days after the massacre, he was excommunicated. Trust me.
Man, it's incredible. Like it's. I hope Catholics are waking up to the excommunication, nonsense. Like how the Catholic Church excommunicates people for their own political ends. It's not to uphold the doctrines of the Catholic faith. Just because Cuomo should have been immediately excommunicated. The guy even did he lit up the World Trade Center building in pink.
Every single.
I'm not I don't take a hardcore I don't take a religious stance on abortion, but I think it is wrong to abort a baby who is because they can abort it now up to the pregnancy, which is crazy. I'm pretty sure this New York abortion law is one of the most aggressive abortion laws in the world, and critics are saying it's infanticide because if a baby survives this late-term abortion, the state's going to execute the baby if the mother gives them the permission. But it's amazing that they can pass something and not one prominent member in the Catholic hierarchy has had nothing. It's just been there's been a couple low level. I think there was a low level Albany priest who came out and said that this is wrong, but there hasn't been any person in position of power in the Catholic Church.
The homosexual Indian Irish Prime Minister of Ireland that ushered in the slaughter of the unborn, Leo Varadkar, was welcomed with open arms by Andrew Cuomo, Bill de Blasio, and Timothy Cardinal Dolan for one of their St. Patrick's parades. They all marched together like a bunch of happy baby-killing homosexuals, all arm in arm, the bunch of them.
And it's I guess it's just the Catholics are unaware of that happening. I guess because
there's a tiny
people think if a regular Catholic saw it, they should know that it's their church that is behind this. I commented on there's this. I saw. I think this guy's YouTube video. This guy was a devout, just a lay Catholic. He made a video about how Cuomo is a communist and he needs to be excommunicated. I brought up the point. A lot of Catholics aren't aware of this. The Jesuit Robert Drinan was as pro-abortion as you get.
The only Jesuit to openly serve in Congress, a congressman and Jesuit priest, the only one was a far left pro-abortion Democrat. Tells you everything you need to know about the Catholic Church and its political leanings.
Oh, absolutely, and it shows again the open. I know we said this before, the open but false policy of the Vatican.
Yep.
They shamelessly say we're all about life. We're the organization that cares about
That's
life.
only for the criminals and the mass murderers. Then they're all about, they take it to the ludicrous extreme of heinous criminals also should be spared capital punishment because, hey, we're pro-life. Meanwhile, they have no advances, no victories on behalf of the unborn.
Yeah, actually, they recently did that. The Jesuit puppet Cuomo recently did that. He revoked the death penalty in New York. While so at the same time that they won't kill a prisoner who possibly could raped a bunch of kids, but they will kill an unwanted baby though in the state of New York.
That's because many of the prisoners work for the Catholic Church. I'm sure you guys need to probably wrap this up because we've been going for a while.
Just one. Yeah, I'll sum it up with this. Just with these recent, I recommend there's some videos out there, but the court cases you want to look up are Warren versus District of Columbia and Castle Rock versus Gonzales. In that first case, this was 1981, Warren versus District of Columbia. It was ruled that the police are only obligated to protect you when you're in custody, or there's the police have a special agreement to protect an individual person or persons. And you can see how this is a Roman system, because when Pope John Paul II came to Los Angeles, he had the biggest police patrol in the history of the department. Literally, they have a page of it on their website. They shamelessly brag that to protect this old pedophile Pope. I'd say, I don't know if all popes, you could say all popes are pedophiles just by the deviant nature of that position. You're basically giving a normal person the power of the creator of the universe, which obviously creates psychopathy within
millions of dollars. How many millions of dollars?
It shows that they actually they ruled that the police don't have in LA there was a case in the 80s in the Court of Appeals with the Watt riots. They actually declared that the police had no duty to protect the people getting beaten up in the Watt riots. But with the Pope though, with this agreement, it's, you see how it's special policing. You have to have a special agreement with the police, and most of the police sheriffs that we found in the United States seem to be Catholic. At least with New York City, that's New York City and Chicago have been Catholic, strictly Catholic police forces since 1900. But it's amazing how they have the discretion. They say it's up to us if we want to protect you or not, and you see who they're serving very clearly when they give the biggest police protection in the history of the department to Pope John II, and they won't even protect innocent LA citizens who are being illegally beaten by police in the Watt riots.
We could just keep going and going, George. But George mentioned, is it Carrick in New York City, that the police chief, police chief and both the chief of the fire department during 9/11 had ties. George, go ahead and wrap up so we can close out.
Well, as Bernard Carrick, who's a Catholic, I don't recall, probably has some education, and Thomas Essen were both Roman Catholic. The governor of New York, George Pisacki, is also Roman Catholic and allegedly a Knight of Malta. Tom Ridge was the governor of Pennsylvania during 9/11. He's also not Roman Catholic. He was one of the different branches of the Catholic Church, but he's also Knight of Malta. We've already discussed Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York City. So almost all your major players at the state and local level of 9/11 were Catholic.
And didn't Tom Ridge end up being the first director of Homeland Insecurity?
Yes.
There you go.
Oh, now, by the way, Eric was just talking about something, how there have been some U.S. court cases saying that police are technically speaking not obligated to provide security for private citizens, The exception being if there's some sort of agreement or concordat, if you will. Well, there's an article that just came out in our local newspaper here about the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department saying for the first time in something like over 100 years, 120 years, whatever it's been, they are no longer to provide security for Bohemian Grove at their annual meeting. And that even though, in addition to receiving their regular salary,
the police provided official protection to the Bohemian Grove meetings when they were like raping little kids. Wow, it's crazy.
Wow.
Yes. Now, in addition to providing their regular salary for the sheriff's deputies and their benefits, they also Bohemian Grove would pay them an additional bonuses, like above and beyond what their what the deputies would normally get. So they're essentially, so the deputies who are out there are double dipping. So in addition to their regular pay, they're getting paid on top of it. And they're being paid while they're on the clock, so to speak. So somebody filed a lawsuit. I don't know all the details, but saying, so starting next year, the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department will no longer provide security for the Bohemian Grove. Now, what will most likely happen is they'll simply be officially off the clock. You know, when they're working their weekends or something, and they'll just pay them anyhow.
Yeah, I was just say like, they'll just be like, yeah, they'll be off the clock and ununiformed. But
Wow.
Yes,
and I'm sure the security will continue. Yeah, and this is a big thing. Like just on this on these court rulings. Like, what was the shooting in Florida? With that could have been a false flag in itself because the Hogg guy's dad was an FBI agent. But the shooting in Broward County, there was that famous, I forget the name of the sheriff, but there was the sheriff who was there and did nothing while the shooting was going on. And like he was ridiculed. But like they actually ruled through the courts that like that sheriff was not obligated. He had no duty to protect any of the kids who were being killed. And they cited the U.S. Supreme Court case, Castle Rock versus Gonzalez. So that's recent, but like it's incredible that even in these school shootings, like they want to say like the solution to these shootings is increased militarized police presence in our neighborhoods, and they're under no obligation to even stop.
The cops were actually there and did nothing. And by the way, even this is how a psyop within a psyop within a psyop. It's still incredibly possible for this not to have been an actual shooting event. And they fabricate this controversy afterwards to create a paper trail for further propaganda, so that you know this is the layer upon layer upon layer of lies. We have an event that never really happened, and we reported to you that during the event the cops failed to do their job, so we'll go ahead and tell you legally they were safe when they did so. You see how that works? Layer upon layer upon layer of lies builds the foundation of the matrix for the next event.
No, I agree. I think that case, because David Hogg has turned into like a best-selling author even.
What a surprise. The little poster boy, the prophylactic poster boy for gun control.
Well, he turned into the perfect poster boy. And like his dad was literally a member of the Federal Bureau of Inquisition.
Yeah.
So I think that, actually, in another shooting in Florida, I know there were so many shootings in Florida, it seems. There was another shooting in Florida where forgetting the shooter's name. I think it was Cruz, maybe. There was another one of those 18-year-old shooters who he didn't have his dad wasn't an FBI agent, but the FBI had been aware of him wanting to shoot a school for over a year. I just forget the name of the shooter, but like it was the mainstream media even covered this, how the FBI knew this guy and his intentions for over a year, but failed to act with all their resources that they somehow were able to.
Well, they just missed it. It was they were going to do something, and then the lunch truck came out front, and they had to stop everything and go out and grab lunch from the lunch truck. And they came back and they said, "Well, wait, what are we doing again? We had something going on. I can't remember." So it happens like that. And look, we can get a whole nother story, a whole nother a stream on how many times government agencies, particularly the Federal Bureau of Terror Instigation, have been intimately involved in some kind of treasonous mass tragedy and suddenly forgot or suddenly misplaced or, and meanwhile, nobody's even disciplined for being personally involved, whether it's the 1993 World Trade Center bombing or the guns of Fast and Spurious, or, just the list goes on and on and on. Just unbelievable corruption. And nobody ever gets punished. Tells you everything you need to know about who's really in control.
Yeah, and with to sum up, the FBI was created to serve the Vatican, not America. It was founded by Charles Joseph Bonaparte.
Yep.
That's right. And there's a book that. Thank you for OCRing this, Johnny. I in making the pages from double to single. But I in the last stream I did with George, I linked. And people can go to your archive page at Johnny Cirucci on archive.org. But the book, The FBI and the Catholic Church, people haven't read it. It's a great read that shows it doesn't go all the way to the inception of the FBI. It analyzes a period from like 1935 to 1965, but you see that it's undeniable. Like the Catholic Church absolutely controls the FBI. It's like it's overwhelming when you see how much they control it. Like Cardinal Cushing said of J. Edgar Hoover, for instance, in these parts, if I quote J. Edgar Hoover, it's just like quoting the Pope. And Hoover was given a sword, Ignatius Loyola, a replica made in Spain of Loyola's sword that he took into battle to murder heretics. There's literally a statue of Loyola stomping on a heretic in Rome. They couldn't be more in the open.
Eric, these are the questions that no one else either asks or answers. When you step back, you watch JFK, Oliver Stone, a movie that is so good with the details it might even qualify as a documentary. You step back and go, why would the Central Intelligence Agency slaughter a sitting president? Why would they be involved in trafficking children? Why would they be involved in trafficking drugs? Why would the FBI be involved in mass crime? Actually, America's worst enemies are her own government agencies. Why? How is that possible, number one? And why is it the case, number two? It's because those institutions were founded by and for the Catholic Church.
Oh, it was Jesuit-trained Joseph Goebbels, a member of the Albertus Magnus Society, Catholic Society. Joseph Goebbels, though, said that the best joke of the democratic system is that it gives its enemies the easy means to destroy it.
Another seminarian, Joseph Goebbels, an almost Catholic priest, if I'm not mistaken. Another almost Catholic priest.
Absolutely. I've seen like 6 or 7 different sources that claim he was directly trained by the Jesuits.
And I've got at least one source that says that Himmler was ordained as a Jesuit, as an actual Jesuit priest.
That makes a lot of sense, just because, it's been universally admitted that he modeled the SS off the Jesuits. So, and possibly, supposedly, let me say with Himmler, supposedly he had that. I think some historians, I know Edmund Paris, this is right, I think I saw it in Edmund Paris's book. He said Himmler had an uncle who was a Jesuit, but I wonder if that could possibly also be, I'm not accusing Edmund Paris of being like a gatekeeper. He just, this is information that rarely gets disclosed to the general public.
I think it was partial. Maybe it was a half truth, a partial truth, and maybe he had a bad source. But
yeah, it could have been something like that. But I'm saying that could have been out to steer people from the realization, because it's a pretty powerful realization if you understand that Himmler was a Jesuit and he was meeting.
He outranked Hitler. The Reichsfuhrer outranked the Führer. The Reichsfuhrer was more powerful than the Führer.
Actually, it's been a lot of, like, Charles Hyham goes in about this. Like, Himmler was working when there was that. I think it was genuine, because it was they even did a movie about this. Valkyrie is the devout Catholic Colonel von Stauffenberg, played by Tom Cruise, who got married in a Orsini mansion. But
he's Orsini himself. Yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. But von Stauffenberg was attempted to kill Hitler in 1944 by putting like a bomb on his desk, like blowing him up. like this guy was a devout Catholic though, who was actually like I've seen sources like he was working with Alan Dulles, he was working with William Donovan because like their plan was to put Himmler as the open head of Germany because they didn't like how Hitler was starting to disrespect the Concordat later in the Nazi regime.
Well, if we question everything, Eric, can we also question the attempt? Why did the attempt fail? Because supposedly Hitler was shielded from the blast by the heavy legs of the table. Are you that stupid? Did you not realize that when you put the briefcase down, it was not in a good position to get the target?
No, I agree.
Is
I
it
think we should.
possible?
I think we should question them because again, Hitler is almost like a Castro effect. Like supposedly there were hundreds of assassinations attempts on Hitler, but he was too good. He got away every time.
It was used as the purge. They used that as an excuse for the purge. They killed Rommel. They made Rommel kill himself as a result of that. And Rommel was there was a chance that Rommel would be a soldier first. We can't have that in the same way that Patton, even though Patton was corrupt, he may have been a soldier first and carried out his duty. So you got to kill those guys off.
No,
So
I
they
agree.
use
I agree. Definitely in the case of Patton, he was definitely a real soldier. I think Patton started to wake up. I haven't done nearly a lot of I haven't read his biographies or anything, but I am aware that he took place in the bonus march suppression. I think it was that in the veterans.
The reason why Patton was cleared to become a general, a 3-star and eventually a 4-star general, I think, no, at least a 3-star. The reason why he was cleared is because he was MacArthur's hatchet man during the suppression of the bonus army.
And MacArthur, the quote for this is in Gerard Colby's book DuPont Dynasty. This was one of the most Jesuitical quotes I've ever seen. MacArthur said that the U.S. veterans were a mob tainted by the spirit of revolution. He called them a mob.
Meanwhile, these were guys. These were guys that came back without arms and legs from World War I, who were promised a bonus, and the United States government said, "Nah, never mind. You're not getting your money." That's all it was. And so these poor guys, and this is right in the Depression, right? Not only did the government renege on the veteran, the government said the money we promised you, you ain't getting. They couldn't even feed themselves because of the Depression. So what else are they going to do? They marched.
Incredible treason.
They marched on Washington. They set up a camp there. And they used the United States military, led by gatekeeping pieces of crap like Shriner Freemason, Douglas MacArthur, who turned around, Major MacArthur turned around to his lieutenant, George Smith Patton, and said, "Get in your tanks and roll over those tents." And Patton, the little gatekeeper that he was at the time, saluted and said, "Yes, sir." And acts of treason like that cleared both of those guys to rise higher in the ranks. The problem for Patton was
very well said, Johnny.
Once he got in command, I've been there, brother. I've been there. I've been in the military. I know how it works. Once he got in command, unfortunately for him, just like Kennedy, he thought maybe he could actually be a general. Kennedy thought maybe he could actually be a president and do presidential things and do general things. And their keeper stepped in and said, "No, you can't. Bye-bye."
Oh, I agree. Even a recent case, Tim Russer thought he was an actual journalist on NBC, questioning the Jesuits. How dare you, Tim Russer, bring up the Skull and Bones on our national televised program?
He questioned both Kerry. What are the chances that the two puppets running for president were both members of a secret society that quote unquote taps only about 800 people a year?
Well, I know it shows that there's no democracy or there's no freedom, like free elections in the U.S. I brought that up in a political science course a couple years ago here at Brock, and because the professor was talking about can a capitalist society become just as corrupt as a communist society? The question of something like that, and I brought up absolutely in the 2004 election, you had two guys running against each other in a fraternity that only taps there's different sources, but there's barely anyone in Skull and Bones. At most, there's 50 new members every year. That's probably
George,
more
every
than they
time,
actually initiate.
George, every time I run into a Trumpette who loves and believes that that fat pedophile and the father Andrew Whitehouse is an actual outsider, I really want to beat him up. I want to beat him up for being so stupid and so gullible. How you think that anybody could come close to that much power and not be as corrupt as to have sex with your own daughter? You're an idiot.
Yeah, what was the? You covered this. It was literally, this was honestly disturbing. He was on the Howard Stern show, and he's like, "Yeah, Ivanka's a nice piece of ass." And he's like, "Yeah,
Yes,
she
Trump
is.
was a
Yeah."
piece of ass, and he agreed. And Trump goes, yeah, she is. Yeah.
Like, damn, man. Like
And
that's just, and just I just wanted to mention just George. I'll get quiet here because I know we all got to get going. But just with MacArthur, I bet someone who is key behind the scenes. This is further research for me. I think the Hugh Aloysius drum, I bet, played a key factor in that bonus march suppression. He was the Jesuit trained. He was officially one of MacArthur's chief lieutenants. I think early on in his military career, but Colonel Hugh Drum, he had a Jesuit priest as his brother, trained at Boston College. He's the official that gave that U.S. military planes, taxpayer funded, to move Father Damien's body
Right.
Belgium. But I think Drum played a key part in this suppression because he then became like the chairman of the New York National Guard and doubtlessly Romanized the fuck out of it. Pardon my language.
Yeah.
He definitely turned the Roman National Guard into like the Gestapo force.
Yes. George,
Drum.
wrap this up.
Okay, a couple of things. Hugh Drum, there's a Fort Drum in New York named in his honor. So this is another.
Oh, they actually no, great point. Yeah, actually, that's I grew up not too far. That's near Syracuse, isn't it, or Watertown?
Yes.
I lived in Brockville, which is probably only 40 minutes from there. Wow, great information, George.
Okay, so another subject for a different show is look at the name of the bases, like Fort Meade, Maryland, and why were they honored with it being named after him? I'll give you a clue. George Meade was a devout Roman Catholic. But just in conclusion, we were talking earlier about incognito Jesuits. I have no proof of this, but I do have quite a bit of circumstantial evidence. I'm convinced that John Nelson Darby was a Jesuit, not a lay Jesuit, but a full-on Jesuit. He lived from 1800 to 1882. He was ordained a deacon in the Church of Ireland, and he was a lawyer. He never married. In, I guess, the 1820s, 1830s, he got involved with the Plymouth Brethren movement, the same church the future Dave Hunt would be involved with in America, and Aleister Crowley. There have been other, yes. So, although Darby did not invent dispensational futurism, he's considered to be the father of it. He got his ideas from Edward
He enabled Schofield. Darby enabled Schofield.
Yes.
No, I'll look into this guy. He's being propped up. He's probably a Jesuit pawn. Sorry, keep going.
Okay, yes. But I think he was a full-on Jesuit, even though he feigned to be a Protestant. He got his ideas from Edward Irving, who was a Freemasonic Presbyterian minister, a Scottish Presbyterian minister. Irving got his ideas from reading a book called, in English, came out like around 1800 or so thereabout. It's called The Coming Messiah and His Glorious Majesty, or something like that. It was in Spanish, so Irving actually had to learn Spanish so he can translate it into English. The author of this book went by the pseudonym Rabbi Ben Ezra, or Jehoshaphat Ben Ezra, whose real name was Emmanuel Lacunza, S.J. So Lacunza advocated this idea, several things, and this is how I'm going to conclude. Lacunza advocated several ideas. One, before, and this was not unique to him. He coupled together several other ideas. One, before the singular Antichrist appears, this is according to Lacunza. I know that's Bellarminianism. all the true believers on the earth would disappear in something that was commonly called the rapture. And the Antichrist would rule on earth for 7 years in what was known as the Great Tribulation. And after the Antichrist
Oh,
ruled,
this is sorry, George. Just keep this is crazy because I watched a video recently of Alan Lamont, and he was saying the same thing is going to happen.
Yes.
So just keep going. So that sounds Alan
after,
Lamont is teaching Jesuit eschatology about a future Antichrist. Sorry, just keep going, George. It's great information.
well, okay, well, he so after he defeated the Antichrist, or I'm sorry, after Jesus comes back after 7 years, there will be a battle in Armageddon in Israel. So that requires the recreation of the modern nation state of Israel, which 200 years ago didn't exist. It's only been around for about 70 years. Well, anyhow, after Jesus defeats this future Antichrist, after 7 years, he'll set up 1,000-year kingdom on the earth, which is known as the millennial kingdom. The reference is in Revelation 20. So Lacuza, writing under the name Ben Ezra, peddled these ideas onto Irving. Irving passed his idea
George,
on to
don't skip over that too quick. We got to get out of here, but don't skip over that. Lacunza was impersonating a Jew.
Yes.
Rabbi, I think Yudah Ben Ezra, something like that. And
yes.
the Jesuit was impersonating a Jew.
Did he write books with a Jewish pseudonym?
Yes, he was a Jewish rabbi as he erased the Protestant understanding that Rome was the whore of Babylon and the Pope was the Antichrist. Now we have this new prophecy that every Christian and so-called Protestant believes today. They believe Jesuit eschatology that has erased Rome from Revelation. You read Revelation 17, and no other entity more thoroughly fulfills the whore drunk on the blood of the saints, clothed in scarlet and purple. Clearly, the Catholic Church and the papacy, and what George is talking about was the Jesuits' complete and total success at erasing that from Christian and Protestant knowledge.
How fitting then for George Washington to say to the Protestants, "Hey, that's pretty stupid of you to burn the picture of the Pope there." When George Washington, the Washington Post admitted this. The Washington
on Guy
Post.
Fawkes Day, when George Washington found his Protestant soldiers celebrating Guy Fawkes Day by burning the Pope in effigy, he excoriated them. He punished them and excoriated them. Told them, "You need the Catholic Church to win this revolution."
And where do you think? And just for the people watching, where do you think George Washington got that when he was 15 years old? Literally, this is on every single this is in mainstream encyclopedias, and I think the Washington Post and the New York Times even admitted this. Washington goes his rules of civility. I think he was 15 or 16. Was literally written. I know you mentioned this on a previous show, Johnny, but it's people haven't seen the people have just heard that from you. It's true. Mainstream
it was a book of Jesuit etiquette.
Sources.
It was copied word for word as from a book on etiquette by the Jesuits in France. George, I'm going to cite you that John Nelson Darby was an incognito Jesuit. Is that okay? I'm going to cite you.
Well, no, that's just I have no proof. It's just speculation.
You gotta when it comes to stuff like this, you got to make educated guesses because these guys are in a position. Darby would never compromise his real nature as a secret Jesuit.
Okay, and of course he never married. Because
perfect. Another one.
Okay, so Darby came to the United States and he spoke at a Bible conference in Niagara in the 1950s. Actually, a little bit later on after that, it was in the 1860s where he met Cyrus Ingersoll Schofield. And Darby basically sold him on this idea. Said, "Wow, this is a great idea." And so Johnny has talked about Schofield.
Didn't Darby know Schofield from? I swear that somehow he knew when he was in prison too. Because Schofield was in prison for forgery.
Okay, so
Schofield went to prison for forgery. The perfect puppet, George. The perfect corrupt puppet.
So anyhow, it took a while for these dispensational futuristic ideas, the Darbyite slash Schofieldian ideas to take garner currency, and it was considered a fringe doctrine. A couple things happened. In 1909, Schofield came out with his study Bible, which is based on the King James text. And then, they sold like millions of copies. But what basically cemented Schofield's reputation in at least fundamentalist Protestantism was he pastored a church in Dallas, Texas, and he died in 1921. And after his death, some of his parishioners said, "You know what? In order to honor him, we should probably establish a seminary," which they called at the time Evangelical Theological Seminary, where they basically the mainstay was dispensational futurism. Now, there's another one that opened in Chicago at the same time called the Moody Bible Institute, and they basically peddle the same ideas. But Evangelical Theological Seminary, which was later renamed Dallas Theological Seminary, served as a template for most of the seminaries that came into being in the U.S. Fuller in Southern California, Biola Talbot in L.A., Denver Theological Seminary, and a whole bunch of other places. And to where almost overnight, within a generation or so, this idea it got from being fringe to being mainstream.
George is absolutely brilliant, and I'm kudos to both you and Eric. Kudos to you because you're usually kind of quiet about this Catholic theology, Christian theology stuff, and even more so to Eric, who's not even a Christian. So, but this stuff is so important to show the manipulation of Christianity to erase the hand of the Catholic Church. One thing we all agree on. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, definitely. You don't have to be a Christian to see the manipulation going on. Like a good book for and again, I've really enjoyed this book again as a non-Christian, written by a Christian Protestant author, Peter J. Doiswick. I know you've OCR'd a couple of these books, Johnny, but I've collected. One of his books was actually declassified in a CIA file, interestingly. But I've collected the works of Peter J. Doiswick from various libraries and scanned them onto the internet. And he's a great Protestant scholar that will show you that everything about the papacy is fraudulent. He goes all the way back to his book History of Dogma, volumes 1 to 4, is very strictly analyzing the origins of the papacy and all the origins of all the different liturgical chants, all the different sacraments, and he goes in incredible detail to show like it's complete fraud. And the Jesuits, he quotes Catholic authors admitting that they don't even believe in Christ. For instance, like Pope Boniface VIII publicly mocked Jesus. He said Jesus was a tyrant, for instance. And this Pope Boniface was like a monster. Like he was raping little girls. This was declared in like the Council of Constance, for instance. So I recommend people. You don't have to you don't have to become a Christian, so to say, to understand the corruption, how Christianity has been corrupted from its true cause. It's if you understand the philosophy of Jesus and to see how the Roman Catholic Church is behaving, it's just a complete disconnect. Like they have like no self-awareness anymore. Like the Catholic Church, like they beat it. What did they do to Stepniak? They beat it. I don't think they canonized them. They beatitized them or beatified them.
Yeah, beatify. Yeah.
In 1998, like that just shows there's absolutely no self-awareness, and it's a joke to call an organization that does that like a holy institution. And just real quickly, George, do you know if these was Darby and Schofield close to Cecil Rhodes at all, the prominent British industrialist? Cecil Rhodes was he was pretty ecumenical. Cecil Rhodes was writing about how he wanted to merge Luther, like the Protestants, with Catholics, and Rhodes, while saying that in an ecumenical spirit, I have quotes here for the preface I'm writing for the Dollar in the Vatican. He literally says in his autobiography, The Last Will and Testament of Cecil Rhodes, page 64 that, quote, please remember the key of my idea discussed with you is a society copied from the Jesuits as to organization. Number one, and I found a source here. I'll let you respond to this, George, after. But like, I found a source from Changing Relations Between Churches in Africa, Europe and Africa by Katharina Kunter, 2008. I'll read this. Like, I found a source that showed that Catholic priests were actually working at Rhodes's British South Africa company as chaplains. And just for instance, like, see, this is a quote here. Cecil John Rhodes, the leader of the pioneer column, later offered the Jesuits 4 large farms and plots of land in the urban area in the Catholic Church, and eventually in which the Catholic Church eventually became one of the biggest landholders in the country. It's something I think to look into, the connection from Rhodes to these Schofield and Darby, because Rhodes was also kind of an ecumenicist in his own way.
Well, okay, I had to look into it. However, I will say this. There was like probably going back, I just found this out recently. I was under the impression that there's something called the Oxford Movement. I've known about that for a long time, which most people assume that took place in the 1830s and 40s. And it was basically a Jesuitical plot to reconquer the Church of England and all of Protestantism in the British Isles. Well, actually, it went back further than that, to like the early 18th century, like 1710, thereabouts. And what they do is they write tracts. This is long before Jack Chick, on why, on the inferiority of Anglicanism and Protestantism as a whole to Catholicism, and why Protestants need to become Catholics. And now, I don't know who but it got ramped up in the early 19th century with the formal Oxford movement. That is when people like the future Newman, John Henry Cardinal Newman, later, or John Henry Newman, who was an Anglican, who later actually became a Catholic. A number of famous Anglicans became Catholics as a result of this. And it was a concerted effort to do things, to get Anglicans to convert to Rome, and for the Anglican Church, if they wouldn't convert, they would be they would sway their tone towards Rome. That is when, I know it's touchy, that is when the Anglican Church officially re-embraced things like Christmas and holy days, high days like.
Just really quick, George, I have to mention this before the show's over. I think I did a video of this on my feed, but there's actually an Anglican church here in the city I'm in St. Catharines. Like, I'm in Thorold, the suburb, but this is an Anglican church, literally right in downtown St. Catharines. Is shamelessly has the Jesuit IHS right on its logo. Wow. Like, it's literally like I was biking to work one day, and I was like, what? Like, like I obviously had to stop and bike over to see what was going on. But literally, the Jesuit IHS, I think it's called Saint Stanislav Anglican Church here in St. Catharines, literally has the Jesuit IHS stamped right on their logo, and they can't make the excuse. I know they sometimes make the excuse that IHS means like Jesus Hominutus. They say it means some Latin, but when the IHS is surrounded by the sunburst, that's distinctly Jesuit, and the sunburst is on this Anglican Church logo. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, George. I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, so anyhow, something I mentioned before. How many Church of Ireland figures were very Catholic? If they weren't Catholic, they were Catholic friendly, like C.S. Lewis,
Abraham Bram Stoker.
Yes, Bram Stoker. I mean, something we mentioned on broadcast a couple weeks ago. His character, Stoker's character, is best known for his novel Count Dracula, and his character in that, Abraham Van Helsing, is a devout Roman Catholic. He's fluent.
And wait a minute, George. You have Bram, whose real name was Abraham, and the hero of his story, Abraham, was a devout Roman Catholic. You see something there, George? You think that maybe Bram was also a secret enthusiast of Rome, but was not allowed to say so? I'm covering this in my upcoming book, George.
Well, if I could just mention something. Okay, this is my last point. I remember reading about this back in November 1998, which would have been the 100th anniversary of the birth of Clive Staples Lewis. And there was somebody, I used to live in Sacramento, and there was somebody who wrote in the local newspaper an op-ed piece saying that he actually knew C.S. Lewis because he was from England originally, and he's one of his students. And he had private conversations, and he said Lewis was very fond of the Catholic Church. Now, he did not officially convert. He remained an Anglican until his death. However, Lewis, in this private conversation, said that he believed in things like the real presence, the perpetual virginity of Mary, her immaculate conception, and things. So basically, purgatory, praying to the dead, the necessity of the magisterium and the papacy and things like that. And he said the only reason why, according to the author of this letter, the only reason why Lewis did not convert is it would have damaged his career.
George, I've got this.
So-
I've got this information. George, this is the lead article. This is the top article of JohnnyCirucci.com. Was the insurgency of Clive Stapleton Lewis. It's the top. It's the latest one that I've done. It's not necessarily the most important. It's just the latest one. And as a result, it's sitting at the top of JohnnyCirucci.com. So just wanted to back you up, man. Guys, this was really profitable. This was super profitable. We need to do this again. We tried. Because it's turned out so good. Now I know why we had to reschedule like 5 freaking times because it was going to be this good. So we stick to it.
Well, fantastic information today, guys. I don't think anyone out there is putting information out that the Cirucci team briefs have done.
Not even
going back, the 2 years. You started doing this in 2016. I recommend I downloaded some of the old podcasts even on my iPhone app, the podcast app. And I recommend people, if you're going on a road trip, just pop on one of the old Resistance Rising podcasts. You'll learn something. That's for sure.
I'm excited and honored to have you partner with us, Eric, because you are equally formidable researcher in your own right. And the reason why I had so much information today is because I was doing that for you. I went back to your channel and was listening to old videos of yours and briefs that you've done, chats that you've done with George late at night. Also, fantastic information on your channel.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that, Johnny. And likewise to you and George. George always brings out some crazy stuff. I'm like, holy cow. Yeah, honestly, and it becomes undeniable, and hopefully, people start doing the right thing and spreading this stuff. And yeah, it gets important. And actually, Paul Blanchard, and this is, I think, the agenda of Eric John Phillips. Paul Blanchard, and I don't agree with everything he says. I think Paul Blanchard tended to be like a statist in some of his writings, but he was a secular humanist who wrote against the Catholic Church. But he said it's important that the anti-Catholic front needs to be like organized and like cool and calm and collected, because because he said, he talked about how it easily could turn into the Know Nothing Party of the 1850s, where if the anti-Catholic opposition, like Phelps, that's what I think Phelps is doing. If the anti-Catholic opposition comes across as like crazy and like lunatic fringe-esque, it actually, it serves
that want to start their own country. Yeah,
racists. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, start your own white pro-Baptist country in Pennsylvania. It actually it does damage to the another example, like Kevin Annett. Kevin Annett had his fake ITC court with the IT. He literally did a video from his bathroom talking about the case. And I actually think guys like Annett, I think he's, like Blanchard pointed out, the Jesuits are aware that the anti-Catholic front needs to come out in a certain way, and they want to make it sound as ridiculous as possible.
Perfect.
And that's just really quickly. I've heard there was this lady that was close to Kevin Annett who said that he was educated by the Jesuits in Winnipeg at St. Paul's School. And the fact, Annett was born in Winnipeg and he grew up there, and there is a Jesuit school there. And I don't want to go into Kevin Annett too much, but people are actively trying to discredit guys like Kevin Annett, for instance. And it's important to be aware of.
The leader of the resistance is a loon. Perfect.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's it's just it's important to when you are presenting this information, just do it in a like we're doing here, do it in a professional, concise manner, and names, places, and dates. That's the key.
Amen. Amen. Guys, stay in touch. Let's do this again real soon.
Okay.
Yeah, sounds good, everyone. Yeah, we'll cut it here. Yeah, thanks for tuning in, everyone, and peace and love. We'll catch you on the next one.
Okay. Thank you.